When I turned 18, my life took a difficult turn. My parents and twin sister decided there wasn't enough space for me at home, essentially forcing me to leave. For the next few years, I struggled with an unstable life, moving from one temporary living situation to another, even living in a tent at one point. I did whatever I could to get by. Despite these challenges, I eventually built a stable life and was able to buy my own house. Now, at 26, just as I've gotten my life in order, my family has suddenly reappeared, led by my sister, who is now expecting her fourth child. They showed up at my door unannounced, looking to move in. This is the same sister who once pushed for me to be kicked out, saying there wasn't enough room for both of us in our childhood home. Growing up, I always felt like I was treated as less important than my sister. It was clear our parents preferred her, and they even admitted they wouldn't have had me if my sister hadn't been conceived. She was always the center of attention, getting all the best toys and clothes, while I barely received enough to keep up appearances. My sister has always shown selfish, narcissistic traits, likely because of how our parents favored her. Instead of being a supportive sibling, she consistently brought me down. The only person who ever treated me kindly in our family was my grandfather. He saw how unfairly I was treated, but when he passed away when I was 15, the last bit of kindness in my home disappeared. When my sister got pregnant as a teenager, our parents married her off to her boyfriend and brought him to live in our already crowded house. This left me without even a couch to sleep on. My dad sometimes slept on the living room couch, so that wasn't an option either. With nowhere else to go and being told not to ask relatives for help, so the family's dysfunction would stay hidden, I was completely forced out. I ended up living in a tent in our backyard, which happened after the police mistakenly brought me home during a brief period of homelessness. This setup was meant to be a reward for keeping quiet about the reality of my living situation. After years of struggle and hard work, I finally managed to improve my life, both physically and emotionally. Now, as my family tries to intrude on the life I've carefully built, I'm at a crossroads, unsure how to deal with their unexpected and unwelcome return. They had once offered me a spot to live in their backyard, but only if I cleaned it up first. Despite the mess, which was littered with flour, sugar, and overrun by rodents, I accepted. At one of the lowest points in my life, I saw this as an opportunity and quickly moved in. My sister, on the other hand, was relieved to see me go, pointing out that there wasn't enough room for me at her place. No one even asked where I was planning to go. Transforming the backyard into a livable space was tough, especially dealing with the rodent problem, but I eventually made it work. Unfortunately, the situation forced me to drop out of high school just a few months before my final exams. My friends encouraged me to stay in the backyard and finish school, but by that time, I had already given up on that path. Instead, I focused on working, relying solely on my earnings to get by. Before long, I realized I needed to improve my skills for a better future. My father was a service technician, and as a kid, I often played with his tools instead of toys, helping him with household repairs. That early experience came in handy later, as I decided to invest in my education and eventually got a job at a car manufacturing plant. I worked hard and steadily climbed the career ladder until I became a design manager. Recently, an old friend who was going through a divorce needed to sell his house quickly. Even though I was hesitant at first, the huge discount and flexible payment plan he offered were too good to pass up, so I decided to buy it. I bought a 4-bedroom house and moved in about 3 weeks ago. To my surprise, my estranged family showed up unannounced at my new home. I hadn't had any contact with them for years, and I lived 17 miles away, so their visit was completely unexpected. I suspect a neighbor who still follows me on social media might have told them where I live. When they barged in, my parents expressed pride in my accomplishments, but it felt strange to see them react to me owning a house at 36, especially since they were still renting. My sister and her husband wandered around the house as if they were inspecting it to move in. When I confronted them, they vaguely claimed they were just checking on me. It was ironic that they suddenly showed interest in my life now, when I didn't need them anymore. During their visit, my sister boldly claimed a bedroom for herself, excited about the private bathroom, as though it was already decided that they would move in. My parents tried to calm her down, asking her to manage her children better. In the middle of this chaos, I was shocked and immediately shut down any discussion about them moving in. The situation quickly escalated as they started pushing the idea that I had a moral obligation to house my sister because of family duty. I stood my ground, reminding them that it was their responsibility, not mine, to provide for their children. I firmly told them to leave my home. making it clear that I wouldn't feel guilty for their poor planning or lack of space. As they left, I felt a sense of peace knowing I was living on my own terms, free from the pressure of their unwanted expectations. I recalled how, back when I was younger, my grandfather allowed my cousin to sleep on the couch, but when I asked for the same favor, he refused and kicked me out. I vented about how I had struggled, living with rodents in my employer's garage and then in a cramped apartment for 10 years, but no one from my family ever checked on me. When I shared these memories, my mother began to cry and tried to hug me, but I stopped her and insisted they leave. My brother-in-law, JN, told me to toughen up, bringing up his own hard times and saying I had more than enough space in my house since I was single. I sharply told him to stay quiet. My sister cursed at me for raising my voice at her husband, but I stood firm and told them they needed to leave, or things would escalate. I made them leave before they could argue back. My anger was clear. I had endured their toxic and selfish behavior for too long, and now their greed was obvious. I was no longer the obedient teenager they used to manipulate. If they had pushed any further, I was fully prepared to involve the police. To clarify, my sister never once offered to pay rent. She and her husband had been freeloading off my parents for over a decade, and now they seemed determined to do the same with me. Despite the clear strain this put on my parents, they never took any steps to encourage her to become independent. Instead, they tried to dump the responsibility onto me. A week after our first confrontation, my mother returned, but this time she was more direct. She argued that my home had enough room to house my sister and her family, again mentioning how crowded things were at their place. I stayed firm in my refusal. When persuasion didn't work, she shifted to veiled threats, implying that my large, mostly empty house was a security risk, and having family around would be safer and help with household chores. I dismissed her manipulative tactics and told her clearly to leave and not come back. Just a few days later, a neighbor informed me of suspicious activity around my house. He said he had seen a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy peering through my windows and hanging around the backyard, likely trying to break in. I was grateful for his vigilance, gave him my contact information, and asked him to keep an eye on things. I had planned to install security cameras, but unfortunately, I didn't act fast enough. 5 days later, the same neighbor called to say he thought someone had broken into my home. When I rushed back, I found out he was right. My sister and her husband, John, had entered through a rear window. When I confronted them, my sister tried to justify their actions, claiming they had no other choice and accusing me of being unreasonable. As I processed her audacity, John smugly commented on how easy it had been. I lost my temper and physically confronted him. My sister tried to get between us, and in the chaos, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, leaving me bleeding. The situation spiraled out of control, and my sister called our parents, telling them I was the aggressor. When the police arrived, they began sorting things out while my sister and John frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son. Despite their pleas, I was ready to press charges against all of them. However, my sister denied the break-in and assault, claiming it was just a family visit gone wrong and her son's actions were only a prank. When my parents arrived, they immediately took my sister's side, pressuring me to drop the charges. They banded together to defend her and tried to make me out to be the vindictive one. Faced with their collective denial and manipulation, I realized they were determined to gaslight me into submission. I was determined not to let my family rewrite the narrative of what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor stepped forward with a crucial statement, which ultimately led to the arrest of everyone involved in the assault. They spent the night in jail because my parents couldn't afford their bail. The next morning, while they faced trial, I was at the hospital getting treated for my injuries and making sure there were no internal damages. I took a few days off to recover and pressed charges for assault, also seeking compensation for my legal fees, which the court granted. Despite my parents' attempts to persuade me to drop the charges, I stood firm. I even threatened legal action against them for their role in orchestrating the attack. Since my nephew is a minor, he was dealt with under juvenile law and only spent a short time in a juvenile facility, with his parents held responsible for restitution, lost wages, and covering my medical expenses. My sister and her husband were fined heavily. In an attempt to ease their financial burden, they asked the court to allow them to complete part of their fine through community service. Since the incident, things have been quiet. I hope they've learned their lesson and will keep their distance. However, my parents haven't let this go. Just yesterday, they showed up at my door and waited outside for an hour until I reluctantly let them in. They pleaded for my help, but when it became clear they were speaking on behalf of my sister, I immediately refused to get involved. That's when they revealed their real reason for visiting. They were getting older, their home was falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me, expecting me to take them in out of duty. I confronted them about their lack of responsibility as parents. They mentioned the idea of giving their house to my sister, which I saw as another tactic to pressure me. They even suggested that my sister could pay rent to live in my house, and I could use it to cover my mortgage. I firmly declined, stating that my sister needed to handle her own financial problems without my involvement. They continued to plead, arguing that my house was too big for just one person, but I made it clear that my future plans didn't involve staying single or accommodating them out of obligation. Their attempts at emotional manipulation didn't work. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past and emphasized that I would not be guilted into giving in. It was obvious they were trying to use family ties to their advantage, but I remained firm in setting boundaries to protect my well-being and future. After they left, visibly upset, I closed the door behind them. Regardless of whatever names they might call me, I resolved not to give in to their demands or let them take advantage of me. Now, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter in my life, stronger and wiser from this experience.
It's finally over. That took forever. Let's get out of here. David, Eric, now that your dad is gone too, I don't have to take care of you two anymore, right? Right after the funeral for my son Charlie, his wife Olivia blurted out those unbelievable words. What could have possibly possessed her to say something like that? How could she say such a terrible thing to the twins, David and Eric, who are drowning in grief over losing their father? You're the only parent these children have left now. Think about it. Huh? I'm remarrying a handsome doctor. The old hag can raise those twin brats. See ya. While I stood there in shock, Olivia selfishly spat out those lines and breezily walked away. The other attendees and I were stunned by this sudden turn of events. It's fine. After Olivia left, I muttered under my breath, I'll take responsibility for them. The chaotic funeral finally over, I returned home and collapsed into bed with a deep sigh. I was utterly exhausted, the day feeling longer than ever before. My eyelids grew heavy on their own. At 2 a.m., I was awoken by strange laughter coming from the next room. When I opened the door, there were two faces illuminated by the pale blue glow of a computer screen in the darkness. There were David and Eric, who should have been consumed by sorrow, laughing as they looked at the computer. I'm Zoe. Ever since I lost my beloved husband 3 years ago, I've been living alone in this house. The one joy in my life is when my adorable grandkids come to visit. Today, my grandsons David and Eric are coming over to play for the first time in a while. So I've been restless with anticipation since morning. Even though lunch preparations are done, I wander around the house feeling like something is missing. Ah, that's right. The camera. The other day, the twins, who just started elementary school, said they would show me their new school uniforms. I started looking for the camera so I could properly capture them in all their glory. Found it. Now I'm all set. Just as I finally felt at ease, I heard a car engine stop in front of the house. Grandma. Hello. Hello. Energetic voices rang out from the entryway. Coming. Welcome, you two. I called back as I hurried to the front door, where David and Eric stood wearing their new backpacks and uniforms. Behind them, my son Charlie and his wife Olivia walked up. Mom, I'm home. Hi, Zoe. Long time no see. I'm so glad you all could make it. Come on in. I welcomed my son's family into the house and we had a photo shoot with the kids in their school uniforms. The sight of my grandchildren wearing backpacks slightly too big for their small frames was absolutely adorable. It was hard to tell if they were wearing the backpacks or if the backpacks were wearing them. Grandma, guess what? Eric and I are in different classes, David shared excitedly. Yeah, I have a male teacher and David has a female teacher. Eric chimed in. That's right, my grandchildren are twins. When my only son Charlie married Olivia 8 years ago, they surprised us all by having twins not long after. I remember being overjoyed at the thought of gaining 2 grandchildren at once. However, I have to admit I was quite shocked when Charlie announced he was marrying Olivia. Charlie had always been a gentle, serious boy who kept to himself throughout his school years. So I never imagined he'd choose such a strikingly beautiful and confident woman as his bride. Thanks to their stunning parents, David and Eric have grown into quite the handsome young lads themselves. They might just be what you'd call beautiful boys. Olivia, eager to capitalize on their good looks, was determined to get the boys into the entertainment industry, signing them up for dance classes and dragging them to auditions. When they first started kindergarten, David and Eric were too young to understand and simply went along with whatever Olivia had planned for them. As I prepared lunch in the kitchen with Charlie, my mind wandered, curious about what the boys had been up to lately. While Olivia stepped out to the car to grab something she forgot, Charlie leaned in and whispered, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." It seemed to be about David and Eric. Right after they started elementary school, they started rebelling, saying they didn't want to dance anymore and hated the idea of being on TV. For a while there, things were pretty rocky between them and Olivia. Apparently, as they developed stronger senses of self in elementary school, they made their feelings clear to Charlie and Olivia. It seems they take after Charlie, both shy and uncomfortable with being in the spotlight. Olivia tried her best to keep them going, but in the end, we decided to let them quit for their own well-being. It almost caused some serious tension between us, to be honest. Things are okay now though. Charlie confided in me quietly, not wanting Olivia or the kids to overhear. I had been worrying about how they were doing lately but hadn't found the right moment to ask. I'm glad Charlie opened up to me. It sounds like the boys are focusing on adjusting to their new school life now. We all gathered around the dining table as David and Eric regaled us with tales of their school adventures. I had been concerned, knowing how reserved they can be, but I was relieved to see they seemed to be enjoying school. After a lively meal and conversation, my heart swelled with happiness as I watched them head home with bright smiles on their faces. A few months later, my son's family of 4 came to visit again. So David, Eric, what new things have you boys been up to lately? I inquired. I learned how to make my drawings move on the computer, David proclaimed proudly. And I'm in the middle of learning the C programming language, Eric added. I'm sorry, I asked you to explain it to me, but it went right over my head. But it sounds like you're learning some incredible things. These days, both boys are far more passionate about computers than sports. I know next to nothing about computers myself. But from what Charlie has told me, there's no doubt that David and Eric's computer skills are leagues ahead of other kids their age. Charlie and I both believe the twins have a real talent for computers and have high hopes for their future in the field. Charlie has even been looking into programming classes in the area for them. I don't get why they're so into those boring computers. They'd be way more likely to get famous and make money if they got on TV instead, Olivia grumbled, clearly not thrilled with their budding interest in technology. Perhaps she still hasn't given up on her dreams of turning them into child stars. What's the harm in letting the kids do what they love? Charlie said, trying to calm Olivia down. I nodded in agreement, thinking to myself, there's nothing that would make me happier than seeing my grandchildren thriving and doing what they enjoy. As time passed, David and Eric entered the 6th grade. They were still as passionate about computers as ever. And apparently they had even completed and graduated from a programming class a few years prior. Lately, it seems Charlie has been away on business trips frequently, often leaving the house empty. As a result, when Olivia's work schedule leaves the kids alone, David and Eric often come over to my house to hang out. "Dad's never home these days, so we can't go out and do anything fun," Eric complained. "Yeah, he promised we'd go camping next holiday, but who knows if he'll actually follow through," David added with a sigh. "Your dad must be really busy with work. I'm sure he's doing his best and holding back his desire to spend time with you boys, so we should cheer him on," I encouraged them. David and Eric seemed a bit dissatisfied with the lack of quality time with Charlie due to his hectic work schedule. A while back, Charlie had excitedly shared with me that he'd been put in charge of a major project that could make or break the company. That project must have finally kicked into high gear, and he's been working hard alongside his team. Come to think of it, I've started watching them overnight quite often recently, not just during the day. At first, I was more than happy to help out, thinking it would give Olivia a much-needed breather since she's practically raising the kids on her own while juggling work. However, it seems that every time Charlie goes on a business trip, she ends up staying out overnight. While I absolutely adore spending time with my grandchildren, it feels like it's been happening a lot more frequently. Since they're in 6th grade now, I figured they wouldn't need too much hands-on care, but perhaps Olivia is finding it overwhelming. "Zoe, sorry to bother you again. I'll be leaving them in your care today," Olivia called out breezily as she dashed off. David and Eric would be staying over again tonight. "Oh no, I forgot my cold medicine," David suddenly remembered. "Oh dear, you've caught a cold? That's not good. Olivia just left, so why don't I give her a call and ask her to bring it over?" I offered. I dialed Olivia's number. It rang several times, but no one picked up. Eventually, it went to voicemail. Olivia wasn't answering her phone. "Mom, she didn't pick up. What should we do about the medicine? I hope David's cold doesn't get worse," I fretted. "Oh yeah, Grandma, whenever Mom has something important going on, she turns her smartphone off," David chimed in. His words caught me off guard. "What? So you're saying whenever she's busy with something important, there's no way to reach her at all?" "Yep, even when we call, it never goes through." "But don't worry, Grandma, my cold isn't that bad. I'll be okay," David reassured me. Compared to my growing concern, the two boys seemed completely unfazed. Even if Olivia has something important going on, what would she do if there was an emergency with the kids? So far, nothing serious has happened and the children are safe, but this is starting to feel like child neglect. I felt sorry for both David and Eric, knowing their mom wasn't giving them the attention they needed, and spent the day with an unsettled feeling in my gut. The next evening, when Olivia came to pick them up, I decided to ask her about it. "Olivia, Eric forgot his medicine, so I tried calling you shortly after you left. Was it difficult for you to answer the phone?" "Oh, right, sorry about that. I had my phone turned off. Didn't the kids tell you?" She replied nonchalantly, as if it were perfectly normal. "Ah, I see. But don't you think it might be better to keep your phone on in case something happens and we need to reach you?" I was taken aback by Olivia's attitude and couldn't bring myself to say anything more. After that, David and Eric stayed over a few more times. While I was watching them, I tried calling Olivia's smartphone several times for various reasons, but as expected, she never picked up. Then one afternoon, I received a call on my smartphone from an unknown number. It wasn't a number I recognized. I hesitantly answered the call and heard a man's frantic voice on the other end. Hello, is this Charlie's mom? I'm Charlie's coworker. I'm sorry for the sudden call. Please try to stay calm and listen. Charlie is in the hospital right now. It took me a moment to process the words I was hearing. A wave of anxiety washed over me. I got the hospital's location from Charlie's coworker and quickly called a taxi. On the way there, I couldn't settle my nerves, worried sick about Charlie's condition. What could have happened for Charlie to end up in the hospital? Was he going to be okay? That's right, I wonder if Olivia knows anything. I decided to try giving her a call first. Despite my desperate wish for her to pick up, the phone just kept ringing and ringing. Once again, she didn't answer. What on earth was she doing that she couldn't be reached even at a time like this? I called over and over, praying she would pick up, but the result was always the same. The entire way to the hospital, I kept trying to get in touch with her, but she never answered her phone. When I arrived at the hospital, Charlie's coworker greeted me with tears in his eyes and filled me in on the situation. Apparently, he had suddenly collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. They gave him the necessary treatment, but his condition was poor and he still hadn't regained consciousness. I tried calling his wife, but no matter how many times I called, she just wouldn't pick up. That's why I contacted you, his mom, instead. Thank you so much for coming right away. So Olivia didn't answer her phone after all. Apparently, he had been suffering from insomnia lately and his complexion had been poor, causing concern at work just before this happened. Was he so busy with work that he couldn't even sleep? Did he push himself too hard? I couldn't help but regret his diligent nature. I knew I needed to let Olivia know what was going on, so I decided to head to Charlie's house. Worried sick about Charlie's condition, I left the hospital with a heavy heart. When I arrived at Charlie's house, David and Eric were there alone, having just returned from school. Grandma, what's going on? Oh, you're home. Is your mom not back yet? Not yet. Should we wait here for her? I agonized over what to tell David and Eric about him. Was it really my place to say something? I decided to wait until Olivia got home so we could explain the situation to the three of them together. After a while, she returned. Olivia, did you check your smartphone? I called you so many times. Olivia rummaged through her purse and pulled out her smartphone. Zoe, what's with the sudden visit? Oh, you're right. I do have a bunch of missed calls. Did something happen? Despite feeling irritated by Olivia's attitude, I took a deep breath and spoke. Olivia, David, Eric, listen calmly. Charlie collapsed at work today and is in the hospital now. The doctors did everything they could for him, but it seems he still hasn't regained consciousness. Shocked by the sudden news, David and Eric froze, their faces etched with disbelief. Olivia, on the other hand, simply let out a surprised what, but her expression remained unchanged as she fiddled with her smartphone. I had expected her to be more shocked and worried, so her reaction caught me off guard. My confusion was completely lost on her, who was absorbed in her smartphone. And so, the days passed by one. Our wish for Charlie to wake up went unanswered as he remained unconscious. The doctor informed us that there was no prospect of him regaining consciousness, and we had to brace ourselves for the inevitable. A few days later, Charlie's funeral was held. David and Eric kept their heads down, not saying a word as tears streamed down their faces. They may be mature for their age, but they're still only in 6th grade. Having lost their beloved dad, they must be in the depths of despair. All I could do was stay by their side and rub their backs in comfort. Olivia, not seeming to care about her grieving children, sat there looking bored and greeting the attendees with a curt, indifferent demeanor. Charlie's co-workers, subordinates, and even his bosses turned out in droves for the funeral. Every single one of them mourned his passing, their faces etched with deep regret and tears flowing freely. Seeing firsthand just how important my son had been to his company, my heart swelled with emotion. But something doesn't add up. I overheard some of Charlie's co-workers talking as they left the funeral yesterday, and the content of their conversation is bothering me. The project had finally gotten off the ground and things were settling down, so why did he have to pass away so suddenly? He hadn't been working overtime lately, but his face looked so haggard. He mentioned he couldn't sleep. I wonder what was weighing on his mind. This conversation left a lasting impression on me and has been swirling around in my head ever since. I had thought that Charlie's busy workload had taken its toll on him, leading to this. But his co-workers didn't mention anything like that at all. In fact, it seems like work had settled down, and they were worried about how he had been doing lately. If he was struggling with something to the point of insomnia, could there have been a reason other than work? With those questions lingering in my mind, we reached the end of the funeral.
Phew, it's finally over. That took forever. Let's get out of here. David, Eric, now that your dad is gone too, I don't have to take care of you brats anymore, right?
Olivia said with a sneer as soon as the funeral ended. I don't think those are the kind of words a mother should be saying to her children with that expression. What could have possessed her to say such a thing? I can't fathom how she could say that to David and Eric, who are in the midst of deep grief over losing their dad. Thinking there must be some mistake, I asked for clarification.
Olivia, what do you mean by that all of a sudden? If these kids are around, they'll just get in my way. I don't need them. How can you say that? You're the only parent these children have left now. Think about it.
I tried my best to calm Olivia down, thinking she must be out of her mind with grief.
There's nothing to think about. This couldn't be more perfect. Now I can live with my boyfriend. Boyfriend? What boyfriend, Olivia? I'm remarrying a handsome doctor. The old hag can raise those twin brats. See ya.
While I stood there in shock, Olivia selfishly spat out those lines and breezily walked away. The other attendees and I were stunned by this sudden turn of events. It's fine. After Olivia left, I muttered under my breath. I'll take responsibility for David and Eric. Rather than growing up with the pain of being abandoned by their mom, I'm sure I can provide them with a much better environment living with me. More than anything, I'm happy to have the chance to live with my adorable grandchildren. As I steeled my resolve in my heart, David spoke up.
Grandma, can we live with you?
Of course you can, that goes without saying. David smiled, looking relieved.
I'd rather live with Grandma than Mom. Mom's never home anyway. I don't think she cares about us, Eric said.
His words pierced my heart. What kind of mother makes her children say such things? Was Olivia really that indifferent to them? We stopped by Charlie's house to quickly pack some of David and Eric's things before finally making it back to my place. After finishing dinner, David and Eric seemed exhausted, barely speaking and looking sleepy. They must be physically and emotionally drained after today. Not only did they have to say goodbye to their dad, but their mom up and left them too. I can't help but worry about their mental state. They both seem so calm, as if they've already accepted this sudden turn of events, but who knows what thoughts are swirling in their minds. Rather than saying anything, I suppose all I can do for now is keep an eye on them. You two must be so tired after everything today. Get some good rest, okay? Once I finish tidying up, I should get to bed early too. By the time I was done with the housework, David and Eric were no longer in the living room. It seems they had taken their showers and gone back to their room. I finally crawled into bed and let out a deep sigh. Suddenly, the events of the day flashed through my mind like a whirlwind. Does Olivia really intend to give up her children for good? Even though it was late, I tried calling her one more time, wanting to confirm how she really felt. I had a sliver of hope that she might answer, but the call went straight to voicemail. I was so utterly exhausted, the day feeling longer than ever before. My eyelids grew heavy on their own. At 2 a.m., I was awoken by the strange sound of laughter coming from the next room. Thinking I must be hearing things, I listened closer, but the laughter indeed continued. They were supposed to be sleeping in the room next door. Those boys should be fast asleep, right? I thought to myself as I quietly crept over to peek into their room just to be sure. When I opened the door, there were two faces illuminated by the pale blue glow of a computer screen in the darkness. David and Eric, who I thought were sleeping, were actually laughing as they looked at the computer.
"What are you two doing up in the middle of the night like this?"
Oh, Grandma. Did we wake you? Sorry about that.
Hey, Grandma, come take a look at this. I did as they asked and peered at the computer screen.
"Olivia? Darling? Whose WhatsApp is this? Don't tell me."
Yup. This is Mom's WhatsApp with her boyfriend.
On the computer screen, I saw a log of Olivia's WhatsApp conversation with a man who appeared to be her boyfriend.
Grandma, you probably have a notification on your smartphone by now too.
At their prompting, I went to grab my smartphone and checked. Sure enough, there was a notification. I opened it to find the same WhatsApp log that was displayed on the computer screen had been sent to me.
"How did you do this? Was it you too?"
David and Eric answered with bright, clear faces.
Yeah. We did it. By now, the image should have been sent to everyone registered in Mom's smartphone. What? What do you mean?
Confused, I asked the two of them to explain the situation.
I think it's Mom's fault that Dad collapsed, David said.
Apparently, Charlie had grown suspicious of Olivia's increasingly frequent overnight absences lately. David overheard Charlie confronting Olivia, demanding to know where she was and what she was doing. But she completely ignored him and brushed him off. Maybe it's because we're still kids. I'm sure Dad was struggling with something, but he never told us anything. It seems Charlie was agonizing over how to deal with Olivia's frequent absences and her constantly leaving the children with me.
"Sometimes when I was sleeping next to Dad, I'd wake up because I could hear him making pained noises. Maybe he was feeling so crushed, he couldn't even sleep," Eric shared.
Call it a child's intuition, but they had noticed their dad was under a lot of stress and not getting enough sleep.
But you know, our uncles and aunts were saying it was because he was so busy with work. It's totally Mom's fault though,
David said, looking frustrated.
"I couldn't say it was Mom's fault at the funeral because no one would believe a kid, but..."
So after the funeral, I decided to show everyone the evidence by programming Mom's smartphone.
They figured even if they tried to tell the adults that their dad had collapsed, no one would believe them. And Olivia would certainly stop them if they tried to speak the truth. I was surprised they would expose her like this, no matter how good they were with computers. The two of them spoke with such bright, clear faces, I couldn't help but be impressed. Still, I wondered how they had managed to manipulate Olivia's smartphone when she was rarely home, so I asked.
Mom's really bad at using smartphones and PC devices. That's why we always set things up for her. We memorized all her passwords and stuff then. We happened to see her WhatsApp too, and that's how we figured out who she was always with. When Mom's with that guy she calls darling,
she really does turn her smartphone off. So we made it so the information would send when she turned it off. So if the images are being sent now, that means her phone is off. Look, all the evidence we prepared is being sent. I checked the notifications on my own smartphone. The brats are going to the old hag's house, so I'll be with Darling today and tomorrow. Darling is so handsome and talented, but my husband, he works so hard all the time but barely makes any money. There's no comparison. Maybe I should frame my husband for cheating so I can divorce him and get a big payout in the settlement. There were so many unbelievable messages. As I opened the notifications, I even saw some about David and Eric. I thought they'd be able to make money since I gave birth to such handsome boys. But neither of them wants to enter the entertainment industry, and they don't have the guts to stick with it. Unbelievable. I paid so much money for their dance lessons and auditions, such a waste. Those kids are nothing but a disappointment. What a mother she is. She forced her own selfish desires on her children and then calls them a disappointment. I really feel for these poor kids. I had always sensed that Olivia was a woman who spoke her mind, but I never imagined she would badmouth others with such a foul mouth. I thought she was just being rude at the funeral because emotions were running high, but is this her true nature? I wonder if Charlie knew this was the kind of person she was, or if he had been deceived. Discovering Olivia's true colors was a huge shock to me. In stark contrast to my shock, David and Eric seemed to have rather refreshed expressions on their faces. I bet our relatives and Mom's friends are all freaking out right about now. A few days later, I received a call from Olivia's mom. I can't even begin to apologize for my daughter's actions. I don't know how to make amends. She kept apologizing profusely, sounding incredibly remorseful. Since what's done is done and can't be undone, I accepted her apology and asked how Olivia was doing. According to her mom, ever since the exposé, her relatives and friends had cut ties with her. As a result, she had no idea where Olivia was or what she was doing now. I guess that's to be expected. I thought to myself, unsurprised. To be honest, there were days when I worried if I had made the right choice by suddenly taking in David and Eric. But I was relieved that we had cut ties with Olivia early on, before she could derail these children's lives any further. I truly believe they'll be able to live much happier lives without Olivia's influence. And apparently, even the man she was cheating with, who she was so keen on remarrying, saw her true colors and dumped her. But that wasn't all. This time, with the evidence of her infidelity spreading even to her friends, one of them decided to track down and investigate the man she was cheating with. As it turns out, he had a bad reputation with women and was dating a bunch of them. She was just one of many. Moreover, his claim of being a doctor was a lie. He was actually just a regular employee at a small company. It seems he's in big trouble now that people around him have caught wind of his numerous misdeeds. Sometime later, I received a call from Charlie's company. They informed me that they would be treating Charlie's death as a work-related accident, so we would be receiving compensation. I knew that his death wasn't the company's fault. So I felt terribly guilty about it being recognized as a work-related accident and receiving compensation. I couldn't just keep quiet and accept the money, so I went to see Charlie's boss. I'm so sorry for all the trouble my son has caused. The truth is, he didn't collapse because of work. It was due to the stress from his wife. I explained, detailing everything that had happened. Charlie's boss looked shocked as he finished listening to my story. But his expression quickly turned serious again. No, regardless of the reason, we want you to accept the compensation. Please think of it as our final way of recognizing Charlie's contributions, he said. He had apparently brought the project to the verge of completion, and thanks to his efforts, it had been a huge success. Charlie's contributions were immense, and they said the project never would have gotten off the ground without him pushing it forward. This project had been the catalyst for the company's significant growth. So they were immensely grateful to him, but regretted not being able to express their appreciation directly. I was so happy to hear them hold him in such high regard. Charlie's life, spent working diligently and doing his best, hadn't been in vain after all. If only I could tell him directly that the project had succeeded, that the company had grown thanks to him. But that wish will never come true. Hoping that he would be rewarded even a little in heaven, I decided to accept the compensation money. The amount was more than enough to cover David and Eric's future educational expenses. Just as Charlie had said when he was alive, I want the two of them to grow up doing what they love, without any restraints. Someday, they'll both have dreams of their own. I don't want them to give up on their dreams just because they're living with me and don't have their parents around. I decided to carefully save this money so that when the time comes, I can give them plenty of options to choose from. With a renewed determination to raise these two to become people who can contribute to society, just like Charlie, I made up my mind. From now on, the three of us will live happily together, keeping him in our thoughts.
Making terrible food when the family's all gathered? Come on!
After just one bite of the meal, Osborne flipped his plate and the food onto the table, filling the room with his angry shout. All the relatives gathered looked shocked, staring in Osborne's direction. None of them had ever seen someone throw food on the floor like that. They must all be feeling the same way.
Hey, what are you doing? It's your fault for making such awful food. Calling yourself a housewife and then making this kind of slop when it matters. Who could eat this?
Osborne snickered through his nose. I looked at him with pity. I didn't make it, though.
What?
Osborne froze, making a foolish sound. Now's my chance, the perfect opportunity. The chance for me, who's been oppressed till now, to fight back. I took a deep breath and calmed myself. My name is Shelley, 32 years old. I used to work for a condominium management company until I got married a year ago and resigned to become a housewife. I would have continued working if not for my husband Osborne's strong insistence that he wanted his wife to be a housewife. I listened to Osborne's request and left my job. Truth be told, I would have liked to work a bit longer, but considering Osborne's income, I figured we could live comfortably without me needing to work. Osborne works for a major consulting firm. We met through work originally, and as we saw each other more because of our shared responsibilities, we became a couple and eventually got married. Osborne had been hopping from one consulting firm to another right after graduating from college, so he was skilled and had a way with words. During our work together, I was impressed by his professionalism and made the first move. I never thought a man like him would be interested in someone as average as me in both looks and abilities, but to my surprise, he reciprocated my feelings. I was so happy that I couldn't stop bragging to my friends about our relationship. My friends seemed fed up, but I was convinced that this was the peak of my happiness. When we decided to get married after a little over a year of dating, I was completely over the moon. Unaware of the troubles that lay ahead. You know, I'm busy with work on weekdays, so I'll only be home on weekends. Please keep that in mind. The night we filed our marriage registration at the city office, Osborne casually mentioned it while watching TV in the living room. I was taken aback by his words, thinking we were about to start a happy married life.
What? What do you mean?
I mean, I'll only be coming home on weekends. Keeps the romance alive, don't you think? Well, yeah, but...
What, you got a problem with that?
No, not at all. Honestly, I was taken aback by his sudden announcement. A weekend marriage, isn't that unusual? It's strange to decide such an important thing all by oneself. If he really wanted a weekend marriage, he should have mentioned it before we got married, why declare it suddenly on the day we register our marriage? Sure, seeing each other less might keep the excitement alive. But isn't it natural to want to be with the one you love all the time? I was more downhearted than I expected, having my expectations for our newlywed life dashed like that. Whether Osborne felt sorry for me or was trying to cheer me up, I couldn't tell, but he was unusually kind to me that day. That night, we consummated our marriage for the first time, temporarily pushing the thought of a weekend marriage out of my mind. Maybe it was a win for Osborne's strategy. Looking back, Osborne's declaration was just the beginning. Little did I know, I was about to face much bigger challenges than a mere weekend marriage. 2 months into our marriage, Osborne only came home on weekends, as he had declared. As a housewife, I wanted to cook dinner for my husband who'd come home tired every day, but my enthusiasm quickly waned. Sometimes when he came home on the weekends, he'd eat out instead. So, Osborne hardly ever ate what I cooked. I had been hinting for a while. Can't we stop this weekend marriage thing?
Huh? You're just a housewife. Are you really going against what I say?
But Osborne would override my opinion as if he were the most important person in the house. Sure, I'm a housewife, but that's because Osborne wanted it that way. I realized that Osborne had me quit my job so he could have his way at home, making me economically dependent on him and unable to go against his commands. That must have been Osborne's goal all along. Lying in bed at night, frustration overflowed. How did things end up like this? All I wanted was a happy marriage. But it's too late for regrets now. All I can do is wait patiently for Osborne to change his mind. I felt like I was thrown into a tunnel without an exit, filled with anxiety. When our marriage hit the 3-month mark, Osborne started coming home only occasionally, even on weekends. This wasn't what we agreed upon. With us barely seeing each other, what's the point of being married? Can we talk about our life together again? I gathered my courage to ask him again on a Friday night. Osborne reeked of alcohol, as if he'd been out drinking after work. At the same time, I detected a sweet fragrance, like that of Venus. It struck me. No, it couldn't be. I've told you over and over. I'm not changing my stance now. Even drunk, Osborne was as adamant as ever in his position. But this isn't what we promised initially. You said we'd spend weekends together. And now? You're not even home on weekends. I never agreed to this. Osborne's face turned red with anger when I said this. I realized I had made him upset.
How many times do I have to say it? I won't budge. Why do you always have to complain? Maybe it's time you understood your place.
Osborne's attitude, so different from before we were married, not valuing me at all, made me go from angry to just sad. Why did Osborne even marry me? Unable to bear it, I quickly retreated to my room. When I heard Osborne getting into the bath, I crept out of my room and sneaked into his. I didn't want to do this, but I couldn't stand being at a disadvantage anymore. I frantically searched his room for any evidence. Months went by, and our situation remained almost like a separation. I stopped saying anything to Osborne, who hardly ever came home. Something else was on my mind now, so I decided to live quietly for the time being. Then, one day, I received a call on my mobile phone. The caller was mother-in-law, Marjorie. I haven't seen Marjorie since we met for marriage introductions. I picked up the phone, wondering what she wanted. Hello? Shelley, it's me. Marjorie, hi. What's up? It sounded like Marjorie was in a supermarket, with the bustling noise coming through the phone. New Year's is coming up. You'll be coming to our place, right? All the relatives will be gathering, and we'd love for you to join us. Oh, you're talking about New Year's? Yes, I'd love to come. More importantly, Marjorie. I wondered if Marjorie knew something about Osborne and decided to probe. Have you spoken to Osborne recently?
Osborne? Oh yes, we've talked several times.
I've been reaching out because I'm concerned about him now that he's finally married. He says his married life is going well.
What?
I was puzzled by Marjorie's statement. Married life is going well? Was that something Osborne told Marjorie? How could our weekend marriage be considered going well? Then it hit me. Osborne must be deliberately lying to Marjorie, making it seem like our marriage is all smooth sailing. Marjorie, being the caring yet overprotective type, adored her son. I could tell from our first meeting and the way she talked about him.
No offense, but I think everything Osborne has told you might be a lie. To be honest.
I explained to Marjorie that Osborne had declared from the beginning of our marriage that he would only come home on weekends, and recently, even those days have become less frequent.
What are you talking about, Shelley? Osborne would never do such a thing. How dare you try to deceive me with lies? Who do you think you are?
Marjorie was furious, raising her voice over the phone. I sighed, thinking, as expected. She only believes Osborne's words. She wouldn't doubt that Osborne could be lying. If anyone speaks ill of Osborne, even if it's his wife, she'd go all out against them. That's her way.
I'm not lying. If you're concerned, I can record what goes on in the house for a month and show you.
Frustrated at being made out to be the villain despite suffering because of Osborne, I snapped back at Marjorie with my suggestion, but she utterly dismissed it.
There's no need for such an embarrassing act. You're the worst kind of daughter-in-law.
And with that, she hung up the phone. I had a feeling it might come to this. My father-in-law is a man of few words, so I can't tell what he thinks of me, but Marjorie probably just sees me as a convenient wife for Osborne. Knowing this made me feel weary of continuing this charade of a marriage with Osborne. I decided it was time to put into action a plan I had been considering for a while. The day arrived when Osborne's family was gathering at their home for the new year. Unsure of what would happen, I was determined to do whatever I could. I was quietly fired up inside. As the new year dawned, I went with Osborne to his parents' house as planned. Before leaving, I made a crucial call to someone.
Man, going to the family home is such a drag.
Osborne got ready and left the house reluctantly. Upon arriving at his parents' house, we were greeted by Osborne's parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. A woman, who seemed to be a housekeeper, was preparing food in the kitchen. She wore glasses and a mask, and understandably, she didn't join our conversations, focusing on her work instead. With so many people around, it was hard to keep track of everyone.
Oh, Shelley, welcome.
Marjorie, still probably distrusting me after our phone call, greeted me without a hint of warmth in her eyes, despite her welcoming words. Forcing a smile, I lifted my stiff cheeks. "Happy New Year!" and managed to put on a smile. After that, Marjorie and I barely spoke as the meal preparations went on. I helped in the kitchen as well. My father-in-law remained his usual silent self, sitting on the sofa and reading the newspaper. Once the meal was ready and I had finished serving, everyone began to eat. I noticed Osborne picking up a dish of stew. And just as I was about to reach for some rice, feeling hungry, he exclaimed,
"Making terrible food when the family's all gathered? Come on!"
The sound of porcelain hitting the floor made everyone's shoulders jerk. Osborne, having flipped his plate and the meal onto the table after just one bite, filled the room with his angry voice. All the gathered relatives looked at him in shock. Never having seen someone throw food on the floor like this before. They must all be feeling the same way.
"Hey, what are you doing? It's your fault for making such awful food. Calling yourself a housewife and then making this kind of slop when it matters. Who could eat this?"
Osborne snorted through his nose. I looked at him with pity.
"I didn't make it, though."
"What?"
Osborne froze, making a foolish sound. Now's my chance. This is the perfect opportunity. The chance for me, who's been oppressed till now, to fight back. I took a deep breath and calmed myself.
"What are you talking about? You were in the kitchen preparing the meal just now.
Osborne looked at me, confused, and snorted through his nose. True, I was in the kitchen. But the housekeeper was there too, right? I was just setting the table. The housekeeper made the meal. Right? I directed my gaze towards the housekeeper, who was supposed to be resting in the back room. Seeing the housekeeper, who had unexpectedly appeared, all the relatives were taken aback. Yes, that's correct. See? And just so you know, I invited the housekeeper. Let me introduce her. This is my mom. The housekeeper, no, mom, took off her glasses and mask. Osborne and his parents were shocked to see her face. They obviously knew Mom and were surprised to see her here. Weren't you the housekeeper Osborne hired? No. Like I'd arranged that. It seemed Marjorie had assumed Osborne had hired the housekeeper, and now she was trembling. Hey, Osborne, you know what my mom does for a living, right? She works at a traditional Japanese restaurant and makes delicious meals every day. But today, she made the dishes lighter for the family. Why did you think I made the meal? Because you were in the kitchen until just now. Osborne raised his voice in frustration in response to my question. Indeed, from an objective standpoint, it might have seemed natural for him to assume that I, having been in the kitchen, had cooked the meal with my mom. However, what Osborne, who hardly ever ate my cooking, didn't realize was that my cooking style is quite different. Unlike the meal my mom prepared today, which was light in flavor, my dishes tend to be richer and more robust. I prefer my food with plenty of soy sauce and mirin, making it quite flavorful. That's true. But the main reason is that you've hardly ever eaten my cooking. Huh? What do you mean? Everyone except Osborne, confused by the situation, widened their eyes. Osborne's face turned pale, and he froze on the spot. I decided to confront him and lay bare all his dishonesty right then and there. On the day we registered our marriage, Osborne declared to me that he would only come home on weekends and spend the weekdays away. It was a so-called weekend marriage. He never mentioned such a thing before we got married. I was shocked. I couldn't agree to it, but whenever I tried to object or discuss it, he would just insist that as a housewife, I had no right to oppose him, and he never listened to my opinions. The relatives were visibly shocked as the truth about our marriage came to light, Marjorie, in particular. That can't be true. Are you still saying that? Osborne has always told me that he and you are living happily together. Don't say such embarrassing things in front of the relatives. Watching Marjorie staunchly defend her son, taking his side to the point of making fierce accusations, I sighed. It was almost time. Time to reveal that secret. Just as I was bracing myself, clenching my fists, a voice came from the entrance. Osborne? Are you here? The voice of an unfamiliar woman caused all the relatives to startle. As one of the relatives exclaimed in confusion, the door swung open, and a young woman peeked in. Dressed in a short skirt, sporting bright red nails, and with glossy hair, she looked to be in her 20s. After scanning the room full of people, she widened her eyes in surprise. Huh? She uttered, sounding confused. Osborne? What's going on here? She called out to Osborne in a sweet voice, looking around bewildered. It was clear that everyone except me was struggling to grasp the situation. Noreen, why are you here? Osborne's expression, filled with surprise, only added to Noreen's confusion as she tilted her head, unable to understand the situation. What do you mean, why? You're the one who called me here. You said you wanted to introduce me to your family because we're getting married. What? When did I say that? 2 weeks ago. When Noreen showed the message exchange on her phone, Osborne was taken aback. I never sent this. Then who did? As they argued fiercely, I stepped forward to clarify. Nice to meet you, I'm Osborne's wife. I'm the one who invited you here today. Sorry, Osborne, but I sent the message without your knowledge. What? Both of them were dumbfounded, their mouths agape. Indeed, I had been plotting to get back at Osborne since the day Marjorie invited me over for New Year's. 2 weeks ago, while Osborne was taking a bath late at night, I snuck out of the bedroom and grabbed his phone. It was clear from their frequent exchanges that Noreen was his affair partner. So, I decided to lure her here today, pretending to be Osborne, to catch them in the act. The relatives began to murmur among themselves after hearing our exchange. And Osborne's parents' faces turned pale. I had my suspicions. Why would Osborne start a life where he only comes home on weekends right after we got married? A weekend marriage means we barely see each other. What's the point of being married if that's the case? If he really loved me, he wouldn't want such a life. That's because I'm busy with work. I've told you this many times. Even after all this, Osborne was still trying to resist. In disbelief, I sighed heavily in exasperation. Work? Yes, I believed that at first. But then I started smelling perfume on you when you came home at night. I couldn't believe it, so I hired a detective to investigate.
What? An investigation?
Osborne trembled all over. I pulled out a report from a private detective from my bag and thrust it at both Osborne and Noreen. I had suspected Osborne's infidelity and had hired a detective a while back. Evidence of his cheating was quickly found, allowing me to gather a substantial amount of proof. You started dating 5 years ago when Noreen was just 15. You picked her up in town and started a relationship. Of course, you couldn't marry a child like Noreen. Plus, she's working in the nightlife industry now. I doubt your parents would approve. But you felt pressure from your parents to marry soon. So, you settled for a safe choice like me to stop them from nagging, all the while continuing your relationship with Noreen, planning to divorce me under the guise of being busy with work, and then marry her. That's the gist of it. I pieced together the information I learned from the detective's report and the message exchanges between Osborne and Noreen, exposing their deceit.
What are you saying? Osborne would never.
Marjorie tried to defend Osborne, but faced with the irrefutable evidence, she could no longer argue and her shoulders slumped in defeat. Osborne and the woman, Noreen, were trembling as they looked at each other. Eventually, Osborne broke the silence with an accusation.
This is low. Using tactics like this to disgrace us, it's filthy.
At his words, I felt a surge of anger so intense it felt like my veins might burst, and I shouted back.
Low? What are you talking about? The only low thing here is you, disappearing right after we got married. Approaching me while having someone else, using me, and then playing the victim? You were just waiting for me to get fed up and initiate a divorce, weren't you? Well, sorry to disappoint. We will get divorced, but you'll be paying me a fair settlement in court. And you too, Noreen.
I glared at Osborne and Noreen with the most intimidating look I had ever mustered.
Why me? I don't have any money. Please, forgive me. I was wrong. But please, not the settlement in court.
Ignoring their pleas, I glared at them once more.
Just get out of here, now.
And yelled. At my scream, Osborne and Noreen finally scurried out of the house with yelps. I sincerely apologize for the disturbance, everyone. As I stepped back, sighs of relief were heard among the relatives. They were all dumbfounded by Osborne's actions, at a loss for words. Shelley. I don't know what to say. Marjorie, who had staunchly believed in Osborne and criticized me, now looked away awkwardly. I left the in-laws' house with my mom, who had pretended to be the housekeeper. I likely wouldn't return to this house again. My troubled marriage of 1 year to Osborne thus came to an end. A few days later, I had Osborne sign the divorce papers and filed them at the city hall. I was officially single again. Although now divorced, my marriage had been so brief and distant that it hardly felt different. Since Osborne and I had lived in a rented apartment, I effectively evicted him without further issues. Afterward, Osborne, lacking funds due to squandering money on his mistress, had to ask relatives for a loan to pay the settlement ordered in the divorce. Despite his supposed elite job, His financial woes were due to his lavish spending on his mistress. However, after the New Year's incident, no relative was willing to lend him money. He was forced to take out a bank loan. Noreen, too, took out a loan to pay her part of the settlement for the divorce court. With both of them now embroiled in the struggle to repay their loans, any plans for marriage had to be postponed. At least until they managed to clear their debts, as both sets of parents unanimously advised against marriage under such financial strain. The in-laws, likely fed up with being entangled in any more trouble, seemed to think it was only fair for them to experience the hardship of debt repayment. Let him struggle with paying his debts for all I care. Compared to the year of suffering I endured, earning money to repay his debts seemed easy, almost like it was someone else's problem. Meanwhile, I returned to my previous job at the condominium management company and am now enjoying my work. It's much better for my mental health than staying cooped up at home. If I ever consider marriage again, I've quietly vowed to myself that it will be with someone who is supportive of both partners working. Leave the kid for you to take care. As I wondered what he meant, Thomas uttered something unbelievable. Apparently, he was taking advantage of our current separation to live with his affair partner. He wanted to divorce me, right after my mother passed away, to marry his mistress. I had heard that separation is often treated like divorce, making it hard to claim compensation for infidelity after separating. Not caring anymore, I hung up the phone. 3 days later, I had 23 missed calls from Thomas on my mobile phone. But I thought his actions were despicable and didn't respond, just blocked his number. However, Thomas was persistent. He even sent texts through social media, which he normally never uses. That's when I decided to fight back against Thomas.
Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you hell.
Thomas, who didn't even attend my mother's funeral and was planning an elopement with his mistress, didn't deserve any sympathy. I was determined to pay him back double for everything he had done to us. My name is Sandra, a 46-year-old part-time worker and a housewife. My family consists of my husband Thomas, a year older than me, and our 16-year-old daughter in high school, Margaret. We lived in a small apartment in the countryside. I got married when I was 23, but after discovering I was infertile, it took 5 years of fertility treatments to finally have our long-awaited daughter. But after Margaret was born, I struggled with first-time parenting. Gradually, I lost my peace of mind and left the company I worked for, temporarily becoming a full-time housewife. In our society, whenever Margaret got sick, I, her mother, was called to accompany her to the hospital. This was what led me to quit my job. It wasn't that I hated caring for Margaret, but my boss indirectly suggested I resign, and I couldn't bear it and ran away. Eventually, staying at home all the time seemed depressing, so I put Margaret in daycare and started earning a bit as a part-time worker. Both Thomas and I couldn't forget the hardship of 5 years of fertility treatment, and we eventually settled on having just Margaret. I first noticed something was off with Thomas when Margaret was in upper elementary school. Margaret was academically gifted, so I really wanted her to try for private middle school. Margaret was positive about the idea of middle school entrance exams, and we even attended open campus events together to choose the best school. Thomas earned enough for us to live comfortably, even with me as a housewife. Plus, I was prepared to use my savings from before marriage or untouched part-time earnings for Margaret's education funds. But Thomas was adamantly against it. No. He was unyielding in his refusal to let Margaret take the exams. What's the point of a middle school entrance exam? Let her go to a regular middle school, that's enough for Margaret. Isn't the entrance exam something for daughters of company presidents or something? No matter how I tried to convince him, Thomas stubbornly refused. Finally, losing patience, I told Margaret, "You can take the exam if you want. I want to support what you want to do. Just focus on your studies without any worries." But Margaret just shook her head, looking sorry. She probably hated seeing us argue over her future. That's when I realized it. I shouldn't be showing this side of us to our child. I started to be extra careful not to get into intense arguments with Thomas for Margaret's sake. That marked the beginning of a life walking on eggshells around Thomas. But the more I tried to be careful, the more sensitive I became, and even trivial things would turn into arguments. Hey, I've been meaning to say this for a while. Isn't this stew too salty? I've always hated this kind of seasoning. Thomas suddenly confessed that he never liked my cooking. After our argument about the entrance exam, it seemed like he no longer held back. He started criticizing without care. For example, he started saying he didn't like Worcestershire sauce or that he always hated the tomatoes in his sandwiches. He kept going on about it at the dinner table, making me feel quite bad. So, reluctantly, I stopped adding tomatoes, which I used to make the dishes look good, and carrots, which he also said he didn't like. I don't want your lunch anymore. It doesn't look good and I lose my appetite. I responded to his requests, but to that he threw away the lunch I made. Fed up with his constant complaints, I finally exploded in anger.
Then eat out. If you're going to complain that much, I won't make your sandwiches ever again.
And from that point on, I stopped making sandwiches for Thomas altogether. A turning point came sometime later. It was when Margaret, who was attending a public middle school, was about to face high school entrance exams. Despite attending public school, she participated in an archery club outside of school and achieved a national competition placement. Margaret was also academically successful and skilled at piano, a hobby I had introduced to her. She always looked forward to her weekly lessons. She was an all-rounder, diligent, and even serving as the vice president of the student council. Although I had reluctantly made her give up on middle school entrance exams, I hoped this time she could attend the high school of her choice. When I asked about her preferred high school, she named a renowned private school within the state. I wasn't sure if I should say it, but I really want to go here. It's a prestigious school for archery, and I'll work hard for it. I nodded emphatically at Margaret's words. Margaret had started to accommodate her father Thomas, always putting herself last. She would decline offers to buy books or clothes she wanted. It's okay. Even when I gave her these as birthday gifts, she looked apologetic. Seeing my child like this filled me, as a mother, with a sense of helplessness. That's why I wanted to make her bravely spoken dream a reality. I reassured her that we could afford it with my savings and education insurance. However, when I informed Thomas about Margaret's educational aspirations, predictably, he flatly refused. No way. Attending a private high school in the state means she can't commute from here. So, she'll need a dorm or an apartment, right? I won't allow it, it's a waste of money. His words infuriated me. Calling the education expenses for our only daughter a waste? I couldn't hold back.
You opposed to her middle school exams too. Why do you always say such things? Doesn't she deserve to live her life the way she wants?
But my words seemed to have no effect on Thomas. He sighed theatrically and exclaimed,
No, private school and living alone as a high school student are a waste of money. If she doesn't go to a local public high school, I won't support you guys financially anymore.
At that moment, I snapped.
Fine, have it your way. But don't complain about whatever we decide to do.
I'll figure it out, so you go ahead and apply to the high school you want. There's no need for you to compromise this time. Okay? Do as you wish. I encouraged Margaret again, but she looked worried. But she hesitated. Even so, I repeatedly reassured her.
It's okay.
And it seemed that Margaret had made up her mind. The following spring, Margaret successfully got into her first choice high school.
Mom, I did it!
Margaret returned from school with a beaming smile and shared the news. There's no parent who wouldn't be overjoyed at their child's successful high school entrance. I made a red velvet cake and praised her like crazy. Although there were tough times, she had done well. However, Thomas, not celebrating this achievement, said something awful.
As promised, you take care of Margaret and yourself from now on. I won't contribute to the household expenses anymore.
And just like that, he coldly stated his decision and stopped providing for the household expenses. Margaret would be moving into the high school dormitory soon. For me, knowing that my parenting phase was somewhat coming to an end and having already decided to work as a regular employee at a hospital where an acquaintance worked, I didn't think I would struggle financially. Therefore, Thomas's words and actions didn't bother me anymore. Months had passed since Margaret started high school. She had adapted to her new life, and I was relieved to hear that. I was working part-time, similar to full-time hours, at a hospital where an acquaintance worked, with an expectation of being made a full-time employee soon. I thought we wouldn't struggle financially. Thus, Thomas's words and actions didn't bother me anymore. Although Thomas and I hadn't divorced yet, we had been living separately for months after he moved out to a different apartment. I was busy with my new life, but realizing I could live without Thomas, I planned to divorce him as soon as everything was ready. I assumed Thomas wouldn't want to continue this separation forever either. Believing this separation would end one way or another, I went to the city office to get divorce papers. But then, I received devastating news. My mom back home had passed away. When I got the call from my dad, I was so shocked that I collapsed. Mom had always been frail, in and out of hospitals since I was young. I remembered praying with Dad for her successful surgeries. I knew she had been battling cancer for a year now and understood that her time was limited. Still, the news of her passing was hard to accept. Dad, having lost his lifelong partner, looked utterly defeated and downcast. He clearly lacked the strength to act as the representative of the family at the funeral. So, I stepped up to take on that role. Being an only child, there was no one else who could do it. Dad weakly smiled at my offer. "That would be a great help," he said in a faint voice. We hadn't told anyone about our separation, not even Dad or our acquaintances. So, I thought it best to invite Thomas to the funeral. I quickly sent him a text with details about Mom's passing and the funeral arrangements. As expected, there was no reply. On the day of the funeral, Thomas didn't show up, and Margaret, who had come home for the occasion, muttered, "He's the worst." Even Dad, who looked so frail, was angry, feeling insulted for his wife and daughter. I had my own grievances against Thomas, but now wasn't the time for that. "Both of you, I feel the same way. But do you want to send her off with angry faces? Mom always said, nothing can beat a smile, didn't she?" My words reminded Dad and Margaret of Mom's cheerful nature. We managed to regain our composure and give Mom a proper send-off. That night, Thomas finally called back, but with an insensitive remark. "I'll leave the kid for you to take care." In such a situation, what was he thinking? As I silently pondered, Thomas, unasked, began to talk volubly. "Let me put it simple. I'm planning to elope with my girlfriend. She's younger and cuter than you." Apparently, he was living with his mistress, using our separation to his advantage, and wanted to divorce me right after my mom's death so he could marry her. I've heard separation is often treated like divorce, making it hard to claim alimony for infidelity afterwards. But for me, such things didn't matter anymore. "Oh, really? Do as you please," I replied and hung up the phone. 3 days later, I had 23 missed calls from Thomas on my mobile phone. Thinking how despicable he was, I didn't respond and blocked his number. When he realized I wasn't going to answer the phone, he started sending apologies through social media. That's when I decided to fight back against Thomas. "Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you hell." Thomas had declared abandoning me and Margaret at the time of my mother's funeral, and on top of that, he was planning an elopement with his mistress. Mercy was unnecessary for someone like him who had mistreated us. I decided to pay him back double for everything he had done. I immediately texted to Thomas. "Let's meet tomorrow." The next day, I waited for Thomas at the cafe where we had agreed to meet. A few minutes later, Thomas arrived in a hurry, his face pale and clearly agitated. I had nothing to say to him. So, I just silently, or perhaps glaringly, stared at him. Thomas, unnerved by my uncharacteristically explicit attitude, slowly began to speak. I truly regret not being able to attend your mom's funeral. But there's a reason. I'm a bit shaken, it was just bad timing. Curious, I listened to his explanation. Apparently, one of Thomas's relatives had collapsed and was in critical condition, needing surgery to have a chance of survival.
So what? If surgery is the only option, then just do it. What does that have to do with anything else?
Thomas's face twisted in anguish as he replied. It's a complex surgical procedure that can't be done in a normal hospital. So, it's going to be expensive, and insurance won't cover it. According to Thomas, it was an advanced medical operation that had to be paid entirely out of pocket. His family decided to pool money, and Thomas had to contribute around $10,000. I was astounded. How could he so easily spin such lies?
It's not Betty or Richard, it's some relative I've never even met, right?
When I coldly responded, Thomas turned red with anger.
Don't be so cold. You, who just lost your mother, should understand my feelings.
I understood, but it was an entirely different issue.
First of all, the timing of your relative's illness right after my mother's death is suspicious. And is it really a disease that requires advanced medical treatment? What's the diagnosis? How much will the surgery cost in total?
As I pressed him with my thoughts, Thomas stumbled over his words and fell silent. My family, being well-known local landowners, had savings close to $1 million, which I was aware of. Even though Thomas might not know the details, he knew my family was wealthy, so I suspected he was after the inheritance. Given his past behavior, I couldn't trust him, even if he genuinely needed a significant amount of money for a medical issue. I sighed exaggeratedly and then continued.
What you and I need to discuss are divorce, custody, and division of assets.
That's all. But then Thomas pleaded.
Wait. I'll never do anything to make you sad again. Reconsider, please.
His face was contorted, clearly desperate to change the situation. I spoke again, more firmly.
I can't have any hope for a future with you anymore. If you feel sorry, please proceed with the divorce.
Saying that, I stood up, paid only for my coffee, and left. That night, Thomas unexpectedly showed up at our house.
Hey, I know you're in there, open the door.
When Thomas left to start our separation, he said he'd never return and left the keys, so naturally, he couldn't get in. However, at that moment, I was in the bathroom and didn't notice Thomas's arrival. It appeared that Margaret had responded instead, and when I noticed something was amiss and went to the front door, I saw the two of them. Margaret was home for the summer holidays, and had been staying with us since the funeral. What I saw was Thomas deeply apologizing and Margaret standing tall, looking down on him.
What's going on? Thomas, what are you doing here?
Thomas looked up, begging for forgiveness.
Please, I'm begging you. Can you just lend me $10,000 as an advance on the property division?
I thought he had come to apologize, but he was still asking for money. It became clear that Thomas didn't care about me or Margaret. Frustrated, I almost let my anger take over but managed to hold back. I wanted to yell and drive him away, but I knew running away wasn't an option anymore. For Margaret's sake, this separation needed to be resolved quickly. After taking a deep breath to calm myself, I said to Thomas,
"That's irrelevant now. I already told you I wouldn't help you out with that. We handled my mother's funeral with my relatives, and you were not involved. Therefore, I don't see any need to care for a relative of yours I've never met."
Thomas seemed to lose his words in response, as if he had nothing to say back. Thomas had always been hands-off with my family matters, whether it was hospitalization or funerals. Yet, now that he was in a bind, he wanted my help, which was far too convenient. Realizing that nothing he said would change my mind, Thomas turned to Margaret.
"Margaret, you tell Mom too. To you, a relative of your father is family too, right? Come on, please." You're kind-hearted. You'd feel bad knowing a family member is sick, right?
Typically quiet, and when he did speak it was usually sarcastic, but in such moments, Thomas became talkative. And now, he was clinging to the daughter he tried to abandon for his mistress, having not even paid for her high school. I felt a headache coming on. I endured a lot for Margaret's sake, but maybe it would have been better to have divorced from the start and lived just the two of us. But it was too late for regrets now. I wondered what Margaret was thinking. Maybe she'd be moved by her father's words and try to persuade me. But as embarrassing as it was for me to have even considered that for a moment, Margaret responded with a resolute expression. "Who are you?" Both Thomas and I were stunned by her response. It wasn't rejection or comfort, but a denial of his very existence. Watching Margaret's composed face, I felt relieved. Impressed by the strength of my grown-up daughter, Margaret continued without looking at Thomas.
You said you're leaving the kid to mom, right? So, you've essentially abandoned your parental rights. You're divorcing mom and going with your mistress, aren't you?
It seemed Margaret had overheard my phone conversation with Thomas. I thought I had been discreet, but she must have had her own thoughts about her father not attending the funeral. To her, a man who was separated and unfaithful, saying he didn't need her, was nothing more than a stranger. She declared him an outsider. That left Thomas utterly devastated, frozen in place. Margaret sighed deeply and glared at him.
After all the obstacles you've put in my path, don't try to act like a father now. To me, the only parent is mom. I don't care about someone who didn't even show up for my beloved grandmother's funeral.
Thomas stayed motionless for a while, but gradually seemed to grasp Margaret's words. Rising up with a furious look, he stared at Margaret.
You ungrateful child! Do you know how much I've sacrificed for you? If you're going to say that, then pay back all the school fees I've paid up till middle school.
How childish was he? Who demands repayment for raising their own child? It made me nauseous to think he was my husband. Thomas, about to say something more, stepped closer to us. Margaret, sensing fear, stepped back. But just then, we heard the siren of a police car and saw it stop in front of the apartment. Thomas halted his advance and slowly turned around. Outside, the people I faced were our neighbors, their expressions even more daunting than Thomas's. Caught up in the commotion with Thomas, I hadn't realized I left the front door open. The walls of the apartment are thin, and many people were home during the evening hours. A neighbor, having heard the ruckus, apparently called the police. When Thomas realized the police were there for him, he became visibly flustered, losing all his previous bravado. The officers stepped out of the patrol car and came straight to us to inquire about the situation. Our neighbors had reported Thomas as a suspicious person. I've always had a good relationship with my neighbors. And when I mentioned my mother's funeral, they even said, "Please let us pay our respects." So they attended, and noticing that Thomas was absent, I had candidly explained. Remembering how they had unanimously condemned Thomas's absence and behavior recently, it was no surprise they called the police when they heard him causing a scene. Thomas always said neighborhood relations were unnecessary, but in that moment, I was grateful for our close-knit community. And the police didn't irresponsibly leave the scene unresolved. Thomas desperately tried to clear up the misunderstanding.
I'm the head of this household. What's wrong with a husband returning to his wife and daughter's home? This is just a little family disagreement, nothing that needs to trouble the police.
That's what he was pleading. His earnest plea only sparked a chorus of boos from onlookers. The officer calmed the crowd and then asked me if Thomas's claims were true. I answered honestly.
I'm embarrassed to say, but we are currently separated. My husband already has someone else, and we were ready for divorce. I've even prepared the divorce papers.
The officer believed my story and instructed Thomas to return to his current residence. The neighbors, who had been watching from a distance, emanated an aura of "go back home already." Thomas still seemed eager to argue, but I told him,
"This won't solve anything. Besides, when we separated, this house was transferred to my name,
and I've been paying the rent. Don't just barge in." He had no reply to that. Margaret then chimed in, echoing my sentiment. "Officer, I'm scared of this man." That seemed to be the final straw. The police, recognizing the need to protect Margaret, a minor, firmly told Thomas, "Dad, it's time to go home." Facing the backlash, Thomas realized his efforts were futile and dejectedly left. 2 weeks have passed since Thomas's visit. I consulted a lawyer about the incident and decided to proceed with the divorce, seeking their assistance. Given Thomas's behavior, a straightforward discussion seemed unlikely. The lawyer agreed, confirming my decision was right. Finally, the day came to speak with Thomas again. He appeared dejected, but I unceremoniously handed him the documents without a word. Thomas browsed through them, puzzled at first, but his expression turned to one of shock. "Wait, what is this? How did you find this out?" The document detailed a compensation claim against Thomas and his mistress. All of Thomas's previous behavior was a facade. While it was true he had an affair, the woman had instigated him to play a part. "If the mother-in-law had passed away, Sandra will inherit something, right? Just shake her up a bit, and she'll probably want to settle with money. It'll be easier for us to get married. How about getting around $10,000? The story about needing money for advanced medical treatment for a sick family member was a lie. It was a fictional scenario created to swindle money from me. I had felt uneasy about the whole situation. After the funeral, Thomas had called nonchalantly, ready to break up, but then suddenly turned desperate by dawn. I suspected there was more to it. The timing was too convenient. Trusting my intuition, right after Thomas's call, I secretly hired a private investigator to conduct a background check. With Thomas openly admitting his affair, he made no attempt to hide his infidelity, making gathering evidence straightforward. Furthermore, emboldened by his admission, he was captured toasting with his mistress. "To our 5th anniversary, cheers!" This meant Thomas had been having an affair for 5 years, even before our separation when our marriage wasn't yet in disarray. This meant I could claim compensation. Confronted with his lies exposed, Thomas began to tremble. His hands weakened, dropping the stack of papers on the desk. His eyes became vacant, his mouth moving as if searching for words. After 5 minutes, he managed to utter, "What should I do?" I leaned forward as if I had been waiting for those words. "I'll be claiming $30,000 from you as compensation for the affair and the emotional distress you've caused me. And from the other woman, $10,000. These amounts were the maximum claimable according to standard rates. Thomas panicked at the hefty sum. "I can't pay that. I mean, if I do, it will ruin my life." His excuses were expected. So, I presented an alternative. "Then let's settle it with compensation in the form of property division. But child support is a separate matter. You'll pay for all of Margaret's expenses, including her high school and future college fees." Faced with Thomas's refusal, I pressed on. "If you default, I'll go to court for enforcement. Your employer will be notified, and the amount will be deducted from your salary." Faced with this reality, Thomas reluctantly signed the documents my lawyer had prepared. This marked the end of our long battle. Afterwards, Thomas and I officially divorced, and the financial matters were settled through compensatory property division. Thomas had nearly no savings due to funding his mistress. So in the end, I was only able to protect the savings I had diligently amassed. Naturally, Thomas ended up with nothing from the divorce, a significant blow to him. Concerned about his employer finding out, he has been diligently paying child support every month. Margaret, as if to spite him, studied hard and got accepted into a prestigious private university. I can only imagine the look on Thomas's face when he received the bill for her tuition. His mistress, shortly after paying me the compensation, was arrested and convicted on charges of marriage fraud. It turns out she had other partners besides Thomas, promising marriage to each of them. Thomas really lacked judgment. Thomas, having lost his family, money, and mistress, and as well as his relationships with relatives and friends, would not have ventured into an affair if he had known it would lead to such despair. He lacked such foresight. Now, he leads a lonely life of just working and going home, paying child support every month. Apparently, his colleagues and neighbors knew about his situation, and he faces their cold stares, living in misery. Never underestimate the power of rural gossip network. Thomas learned this the hard way. Meanwhile, I returned home to support my dad, leading a peaceful life. One day, as my daughter was nearing her college graduation, she brought home a young man who seemed very pleasant.
"He's my boyfriend."
Dad, moved to tears at the prospect of Margaret's marriage, and I finally felt a sense of relief. Months later, as I helped Margaret with her veil on her wedding day, she said to me with tears in her eyes, "Mom, thank you for raising me. I promise I'll live a happy life." Attending my beloved daughter Margaret's wedding filled me with joy. Having parted ways with a terrible husband and seeing Margaret in her wedding dress was more than enough to fill my heart. I decided to cherish every minute and second for the rest of my life.
"Here, this is for you, Mom."
Emma said so, but then in the next moment, she flipped the stew onto the floor.
"What?"
It was the first time my son, Michael's family had come over to our house. I was preparing dinner with Stella, my daughter-in-law, and Emma, my 3-year-old granddaughter. But then Emma, instead of placing the stew at Stella's seat, deliberately spilled it on the floor. It wasn't because she tripped or slipped. She clearly did it on purpose.
"Wasting food like that. Why would you do something like this?"
I couldn't help but scold Emma harshly.
"Because I thought it was easier for Mom to eat."
Startled by being scolded, Emma said, crying and shaken.
"Easier to eat?"
I couldn't believe Emma's words and unconsciously repeated them.
"Mom always eats on the floor." "What do you mean?"
Sobbing, Emma tried to explain. Hearing Emma's surreal words, I looked at Stella to question her. Seeing Stella with a pale face and her shoulders shrunken, I felt she was hiding something. "Good morning." Today, as always, while looking at the portrait of my deceased husband, I greeted. I have been living alone since my husband Ian passed away a few years ago. The expression on Ian's face in the portrait is grumpy, with a deep furrow between his brows. Thinking back, I hardly ever saw him smile during his lifetime. Our marriage was arranged, and from the beginning, we were careful with each other. We barely spoke, each of us strictly keeping to our roles. A happy marriage seemed far from achievable, and we never went out together even on holidays. At that time, I didn't have friends to call my own, and of course, it was a time when there were no mobile phones, so I came to think that's just what marriage was. Ian would lock himself in his room or go out alone on weekends, coming back late at night. And sometimes we wouldn't even talk at home, always an icy atmosphere prevailing. Yet, my in-laws were persistent in wanting to see a grandchild. Suspecting illness due to the lack of childbirth news, they urged me to go to the hospital repeatedly. Ian, for his part, seemed annoyed being nagged, shared the bedroom with me just for one night. Luckily, I became pregnant and decided to pour all my love into raising the child. Ian showed no interest even as my belly grew, mercilessly assigning me household chores even when I was immobilized by morning sickness and wasn't even there for the birth of our child. When I was too exhausted and asked Ian for help, he dismissed me by saying he was busy. However, when our son Michael was born, Ian changed as if he were a different person and actively involved himself in parenting. For the first time, Ian suggested we go shopping together with Michael.
"What kind of picture books should we read to Michael?"
I couldn't hide my joy and spoke to Ian more than usual.
"Wouldn't this outfit look nice on him?"
Contrary to my excitement, Ian still had an angry look. He hardly responded and dismissed all my choices with a sigh and told me that he would decide everything. I wanted us to cooperate in parenting, but Ian rejected everything I tried to do or say.
Only a man can understand what a boy needs.
And eventually, even when feeding Michael, he said he wanted to focus on the meal, so he moved to a separate room. Ian was quite strict about everything from how to hold a fork and a knife and to the order of eating. It took 6 months before Ian approved of Michael's eating manners and allowed him to eat with me. The first time I saw Michael eat, I was astonished by how neatly he did it. He never complained or showed weakness, focusing solely on his studies and not playing with friends.
Michael, well done. Why don't you take a break sometimes?
I tried to comfort Michael with some cake as a snack while Ian was away.
Sweets aren't good for the body.
He refused without even glancing my way. As Michael entered high school, he joined the baseball team, wanting to train his spirit, and became a star pitcher of the team. Even after that, thanks to his disciplined effort, he tackled everything with all his might and graduated top of his class from a prestigious university known for its difficulty. Raised by the strict Ian, Michael grew up to be so graceful in his movements that people passing by on the streets would stop and stare. It seems he was even approached by several women for dates. I once saw Michael sighing to himself.
Michael, isn't there someone you're interested in? I find it more meaningful to spend my time honing myself, rather than romance.
His response to my casual question was marked by an even deeper sigh. Eventually, Michael made neither friends nor lovers, always a lone wolf, establishing himself as an object of admiration from afar. After university, he landed a job at a major publishing company, enviable to many. The publishing company kept him busy, and Michael lived a life of constant business trips, hardly ever returning home. He woke up early every morning and returned home on the last train. With such a lifestyle, he had no chance for encounters, dedicating his days to work alone. Even the formidable Ian would be asleep by the time Michael came home, so I secretly prepared snacks for him.
A man's body is his capital.
Ian had always fed Michael a perfect meal of one soup and one dish, and so he was forbidden snacks, especially midnight snacks. However, no matter how balanced the diet, it was clear that the hard-working Michael was gradually losing weight due to insufficient nutrition.
He's going to collapse if he keeps this up.
Michael initially refused the midnight snack, wanting to go to bed early. But one day, after exchanging such words several times, Michael's stomach growled loudly, cutting off his words.
"The stew is ready." I said, "I want to go to sleep." "See, the stomach doesn't lie,"
I gently told Michael, who turned bright red and looked down.
"Is it really okay for me to eat?" "Of course. I made it for that reason. Thank you."
With a slightly trembling voice, Michael carefully brought the spoon to his mouth. Then, with his spoon in his mouth, Michael froze.
"Michael, what's wrong?" "It's delicious."
It seemed the taste was shockingly good for Michael. He devoured the steaming stew, even asking for seconds. After finishing 3 plates, Michael showed a smile I had never seen before.
"Ah, this is the best feeling. I didn't know there was something this delicious. You've worked hard every day. I'll prepare a snack for you tomorrow night too."
From that day on, Michael began to eat the midnight snacks I prepared with curiosity. Thanks to that, Michael's weight returned to normal, unbeknownst to Ian. The time for midnight snacks, the only time Michael and I spent together, became the time I also looked forward to as well.
"Mom, what's for tonight's snack?" "Tonight, it's ramen." "Ramen? I've been wanting to try that."
For Michael, who had never eaten out, the midnight snacks I made were all first-time experiences. Every time, Michael would light up like a child and eagerly eat up the meal. And so, seeing Michael off to work in the morning as usual became part of my daily routine. Michael, having regained his health, made significant progress at work, becoming regarded as the star in the company. This led to a series of invitations from women, it seems. Seeing this, Ian, perhaps unable to stand it, recommended an arranged marriage, and quickly, the discussions concluded, and Michael ended up getting married without any prior dating experience. Michael married Stella, a woman who worked as a secretary to the president of a famous company. Though she was of a quiet demeanor, she appeared to be a polite, serious person.
"I am inexperienced, so I ask for your kindness."
At our first meeting during the introduction, Stella greeted us politely, a rarity these days. I will do my best to be a good wife and support Michael. Stella smiled softly, narrowing her beautiful eyes, and I thought she looked as beautiful as a blossoming flower. We're going to be family, so don't hesitate to rely on us for anything. Happy as if I had gained a daughter, I exchanged contact information with Stella and told her so. Stella, coming from a family that lived a bit far away, nodded happily to my words. Thank you very much. It's very reassuring. Then, the newlyweds moved to the neighboring town. Anticipating they might have a lot of unfamiliar things to deal with in their new life, I decided to frequently send messages via mobile phone. However, when I asked if they needed any help, Stella, who was already domestic and skilled in household chores, seemed to have quickly won over Michael's heart. It appeared Michael often had to go on business trips due to work, but they seemed to get along well, going shopping together on holidays. Not only that, but Stella also took care of me by giving me candies when I had a sore throat or recommending a good plaster when I mentioned I had hurt my back, always considerate towards me. She would quickly reply to my messages, so I thought there was no need to worry. When I told Ian about Michael and Stella, he nodded as if to say, of course, making me completely at ease.
I'm happy to see them so happy.
Michael and Stella were blessed with a daughter named Emma in their 4th year of marriage, bringing me great joy. And I think even Ian softened a bit. However, life doesn't always continue happily. Before Emma turned 2, my Ian suddenly collapsed. Ian, who had lived a life rarely seen smiling, seemed to have been unknowingly harboring stress. By the time he was advised to be hospitalized, it was too late, and cancer had spread throughout his body. And so, Ian passed away, leaving us behind. After the funeral, as I started living alone, messages from Stella, which used to come frequently, gradually became scarce. Even when I offered to help with childcare, I was gently refused, not wanting me to go through the trouble. It started after Ian's funeral. Stella suddenly began acting strangely, and when I inquired about Emma or their life, her responses were curt, and sometimes there was no reply at all. She wouldn't answer phone calls, and I worried every day. Feeling the distance between Stella, Emma, and myself, time passed, and before I knew it, Emma was 3. Thinking at least for Emma's 3rd birthday, I decided to send a message about having a meal at my house.
Happy 3rd birthday to Emma. Have you gotten used to parenting?
Yes, thank you. It's been a while since we've seen each other. How about a meal at my place? No, thank you. Stella's cold reply made me sigh. I haven't had much to look forward to since I became alone. I want to celebrate my first grandchild's 3rd birthday. After sending such a message, perhaps my feelings got through, as she curtly replied, "All right, we'll go." I had doubts about Stella's sudden consent, but the joy of meeting Emma soon dispelled them. And finally, the day of the family meal arrived. Stella, it's been a while. I greeted Stella and her somewhat tense family with a smile. Sierra, it's been a while. Thank you for inviting us today. Wondering if they were nervous after such a long time, I let them into my house. Come on, Emma, say hello to Grandma. Emma, who had been shyly hiding behind Stella, came forward quietly when encouraged and bowed politely. Grandma, hello. Contrary to Stella's uneasy and somber demeanor, Emma greeted me with a bright smile. Emma, hello. I made stew today, let's eat together.
Yay! I love stew.
It was the first time I had seen Emma since she was just a baby. I was worried she might be shy, but Emma's cheerful and innocent demeanor lifted some of my anxiety. However, Stella, hunched over and unusually vigilant, was not the Stella I knew. She used to be considerate and attentive to her surroundings. While I was concerned about Stella, I decided to wait and see, understanding she might have things she didn't want to talk about.
Where's Michael?
Stella, looking unsettled, scanned the inside of the house. Oh, Michael will be coming directly from his business trip, so he'll be late. I received a message. Stella, you didn't know? That's right. I'm sorry, I might have missed the message. Stella seemed relieved for a moment and hastily checked her mobile phone as if to hide her expression. I'm sorry, I had a message too. I can't believe I missed it. I feel like a failure as a wife. Stella's blue face and the way she berated herself seemed excessive to me. The message had just come in, so there was no need to worry so much. However, I didn't press further in front of Emma. It's not your fault, it's okay. Sit down, and I'll reheat the stew. Sorry. Her voice was so low I had to ask again. Stella, did you say something? Nothing, it's nothing. Stella seemed even more withdrawn, making me feel she was hiding something from me. It was just a hunch, but these intuitions often prove correct. I'll help you carry it. Emma ran over with an innocent smile, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Oh, thank you. But stay back from the stove, it's dangerous. Emma's offer to help was impressively mature for a 3-year-old. Stella, meanwhile, sat down hesitantly and stared solemnly at her spoon. Here you go, be careful, it's hot. Okay. Emma energetically took her plate and slowly walked over to Stella. And then, here, this is for you, Mom. Emma said, and in the next moment, did something unbelievable. What? Emma deliberately spilled the stew on the floor instead of placing it at Stella's seat. It wasn't because she tripped or slipped. She clearly did it on purpose. Why would you do something like this? Wasting food. I couldn't help but scold Emma harshly. Because it's easier for Mom to eat. Surprised by the scolding, Emma said, crying and shaken. Easier to eat? I couldn't believe Emma's words and repeated them unconsciously. Mom always eats on the floor. Eating on the floor? What do you mean? Mom always eats on the floor because Dad makes her. Emma tried to explain, sobbing. Hearing Emma's surreal words, I looked at Stella, who was trembling and pale. Stella, what's going on? Just as Stella was about to speak, the doorbell rang, and Michael appeared at the entrance. Despite the awkward timing, I quickly cleaned up the spilled stew and welcomed Michael in. I'm home. Did something happen? Michael seemed puzzled by the delay between the doorbell and the door opening. Welcome back. I couldn't leave the stove. I tried to act normally, hiding my agitation. I see, is that stew I smell? Yes, your favorite stew. I felt relieved I had made stew and breathed a sigh of relief. Unaware of anything, Michael cheerfully entered the living room, ignoring Stella's distress and sat down with a thud. Nothing beats Mom's stew. Michael spoke loudly while Stella bit her lip tightly. Feeling the tense atmosphere between them, I forced a smile, struggling to maintain a facade. I was skeptical about Michael making her eat on the floor, but I sensed their relationship wasn't good. The conversation remained superficial, the stew tasted bland, but somehow, the meal ended peacefully. After the Michael family left, I messaged Stella about the incident. The only reply I got was it's nothing. It can't be nothing. I murmured quietly to the mobile phone screen, reflecting on our interactions. Stella's messages have been cold lately. The distant replies didn't seem like they were coming from the caring Stella I knew. Thinking about the incident made me wonder if Michael was controlling her phone. I can't overlook what just happened. I need to check on things myself. With that thought, I decided to visit Michael's house. Even though it's spring, it was already dusk. I shivered in the cold air as I approached their house. Just then, I heard a loud argument. It's your fault. What? That was Michael's voice. Panicked, I pressed the doorbell. Michael, with a forced smile, greeted me. Mom, we just said goodbye, what brings you back? I need to talk to Stella. What? Well, Stella's tired from the visit, I'll pass the message. Michael blocked my way, visibly flustered. This is an important matter between women. My firm tone left Michael with no choice but to let me in. Stella? Looking around inside, I noticed the bathroom light was on. I'm going in. As I headed to the bathroom, Michael hurried after me, panicking.
Stella's in there, you can't go in now.
But I entered the bathroom before Michael could stop me. And what I saw was unexpected.
Stella!
Stella was in the shower, drenched, sitting on the floor.
Sierra. I was cleaning the shower and accidentally turned it on myself.
Stella weakly smiled as she spoke to me.
This is terrible, you'll catch a cold.
After finding a towel, I wrapped Stella in it, drying her hair and arms.
I can't believe this. Sorry, Mom, Stella always messes up when I'm not watching.
Michael didn't even attempt to get a towel, instead crossing his arms with an angry look. Stella was in a daze, quietly letting me help her. Seeing Stella's slight shivers, I couldn't deny Emma's words were true.
Stella, I've dried you off somewhat, but you need to change immediately.
Sierra, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Always like this. Stella can't do anything without me. Michael complained, but Stella's fear was evident. Pretending to use the bathroom, I discreetly called the police, and soon the doorbell rang, signaling their arrival.
Who's that?
Michael answered reluctantly.
We received complaints about loud noises from this house.
The officer said, to which Michael lied about a misunderstanding. The officer insisted on speaking with us after checking the neighborhood.
Today's a bad day.
Scratching his head, Michael opened the door. 3 officers entered swiftly, one securing Stella and Emma while the others restrained Michael.
What?
Michael resisted desperately, but the officers were unfazed.
What the hell? What did I do?
He knew he couldn't fight off the police, but he still tried to make himself loose. To that the police said in a low voice,
If you don't calm down, you're obstructing the execution of our duties.
Michael turned pale and suddenly became quiet. Meanwhile, Stella, overwhelmed by the sudden events, saw the subdued Michael and burst into tears. Looking at me and the officers, she spoke quietly.
I can't take it anymore.
Stella revealed her pent-up frustrations.
As soon as we got married, he submitted my resignation without my consent. I protested to the CEO, but no one believed me.
Rumors had spread that Stella complained about her low salary and was unhappy with the CEO, none of which were true. Ultimately, her resignation was accepted despite her objections.
Life became hell after I became a housewife.
First, her mobile phone was taken away. In her unfamiliar married life, it seems Stella had many things she wanted to discuss with me or her parents, but Michael wouldn't listen.
Especially about meals. Whatever I cooked was always criticized as bad. I wanted to ask Sierra for recipes, but was told to figure it out on my own.
At first, it was just verbal criticisms, so Stella thought she could bear it.
Things got worse when Emma was born. He did help with childcare, but...
Michael appeared to be a kind and good father to Emma, but his verbal abuse towards Stella in her presence increased.
After Ian passed, the harassment intensified.
Verbal abuse became a routine. Stella was ordered to eat meals on the floor and endured days of being overworked by Michael. When they went shopping, she was only allowed to buy what Michael specified, limiting her outings to the bare essentials. Any slight dissatisfaction from Michael, like a lightly cleaned area or a wrinkled shirt, resulted in Stella being doused with cold shower. Using water as a means of harassment left no physical marks.
I had no one to turn to, it was so hard.
Tears fell again from Stella's eyes. She confirmed my suspicions of her suffering under Michael's harassment.
You've been enduring all alone. It must have been so hard.
I regretted not noticing the signs earlier. As I comforted Stella, I reflected on my actions. Michael faced interrogation after everything was revealed. During the interrogation, Michael sat arrogantly, denying any wrongdoing. An officer, unable to overlook Michael's behavior, pressed him hard. Why Stella acted fearfully around Michael, and the reason Emma naturally spilled the stew on the floor were questioned. Even without visible marks, harassment traces could be investigated with modern medical technology, the officer sternly stated. Finally cornered, Michael confessed. "I've been under a lot of stress." Michael murmured as if speaking to himself. He resented the strict discipline enforced by his father since childhood. He was strictly told about the order of the meal he ate and the right size he was supposed to eat in one bite. "You can't even do this." Harsh scoldings for minor mistakes were part of his upbringing. Forced to learn kanji and English at a young age, Michael was made to revise tirelessly for any mistakes. In elementary school, while peers enjoyed games, Michael was sent to unwanted lessons and cram schools. He revealed his dissatisfaction with all of it. In high school, he was forced into a strict baseball team, despite having no interest. "The first time I played soccer during a break, I found it incredibly fun, but my father never allowed me to switch to the soccer team." I was shocked by Michael's words. I trusted Ian to take care of meals in another room, never questioning it, and rejoiced at Michael's academic and extracurricular diligence. "All the times you were working so hard, it wasn't because you enjoyed those activities." I didn't know Michael loved soccer, and I was unaware of his interactions with Ian. I was just preparing lunches every day without knowing anything about my family. "I had no idea you felt that way, Michael. It's natural for you not to know." He said it was a man's promise and made me keep quiet. Michael, adeptly trained mentally, easily maintained composure without my knowledge. He didn't enjoy studying either. He was restricted from popular student activities like gaming and fashion interests. And even his love for sweets was limited. Ultimately, an arranged marriage decided by Ian added to his growing resentment. Having the marriage arranged without his consent, Michael seemed to have started feeling indifferent about everything. Even after getting married and moving away, the pressure of being married to someone chosen by Dad made him feel monitored, and the curse lifted only after Dad's death. "I became obsessed with the idea that Stella should strive just like me." That was how Michael concluded. I thought I had raised Michael together with Ian. I had no inkling Michael was enduring such hardship behind my back. The guilt and powerlessness overwhelmed me. Despite Michael and Ian keeping silent, I bear responsibility for not noticing. "Stella, this isn't something an apology can fix, but it was my fault for raising him poorly. I'm truly sorry." "No. I'm the one who should apologize for not being able to heal Michael's heart." Stella's words, ever so kind, made tears spill from my eyes. "Stella, you've done nothing wrong. I'm truly sorry for everything." Afterward, Michael was arrested for assault. Having shared his burdens, he seemed somewhat relieved. He will now have time to reflect and make amends. Stella decided to divorce Michael, taking Emma back to her parents' home. "Sierra, thank you for everything. I haven't done anything worthy of your thanks." I decided to support Stella and Emma financially in Michael's stead. Initially hesitant, Stella accepted after I expressed a desire to maintain a good relationship. "I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. I'll always consider you as my family. Thank you. Having a relationship with you and Emma is a great comfort to me." Stella, having settled into her new life, seemed to regain her bright smile. I regularly received photos of Stella and Emma. She also invites me several times a year to visit Emma. "Sierra, would you like to come over sometime? Emma misses you." Seasons have cycled through peaceful days since the incident. Emma started going to elementary school and even visited my house alone. "Exactly, Emma, you're doing great." I was teaching Emma how to make hamburgers during one of her visits. "Grandma, this is fun." Emma showed a carefree smile, shaping the hamburgers perfectly. "Indeed, it's fun. It'd be nice if Mom could join us next time." "Yeah. I'll make a lot." I deeply cherished these moments of happiness. Relieved that Michael hadn't inflicted lasting wounds on Emma, I wished for her to always be smiling. As we placed her small hamburgers in the pan, her eyes sparkled with anticipation for the completion of the meal. "May your life be filled with smiles from now on," I whispered, as if making a vow. You're nothing but a useless parasite. Get out of your parents' house now. As I was moving down the hallway in my wheelchair, I was suddenly confronted by my brother's wife, Angela. Thinking it was just her usual harassment, I pretended not to hear. But then, she stood in front of me, blocking my way. Next thing I knew, I felt like I was floating, followed by a jolt of pain. Ouch! Angela had suddenly pushed me and my wheelchair to the floor. I felt a sharp pain in my arm and ended up crawling on the floor. Then, with a pleased smile, she kicked my wheelchair out of my reach. Why are you doing this to me? You're in the way. I'm not giving back your wheelchair until you agree to leave your parents' house. Angela always looked down on me, treating me horribly without remorse. At that moment, I realized I could never understand her and decided to leave the house I had grown up in. Now this big house and all its wealth are mine. Angela's face lit up with a devilish grin, delighted by the situation. At that moment, I vowed revenge against the truly terrifying Angela, who seemed willing to do anything for her own desires. I am Margaret, 33 years old. 3 years ago, on a rainy day, I fell down the stairs at the station. The fall caused a spinal injury, leaving me paraplegic, dependent on my wheelchair. When I first realized I couldn't move my legs, I cried tears of frustration. But now, I've accepted my reality and have adapted to work from home, doing what I can. I've always lived in my parents' house, which was remodeled 2 years ago to be wheelchair accessible. Being self-conscious, I mostly stay indoors. In my family home, I also live with my brother Kevin and his wife Angela, who married a year ago. Angela, my brother's wife, is 3 years older than me. I was initially excited to have Angela like a real sister, but that was a big mistake. The day Angela moved in, after unpacking, she smiled at me sweetly and asked in a gentle voice, "Now that we're living together, I'd love to have a heart-to-heart in your room to get along better, Margaret." "I'd love that. I really want to be friends with you, Angela." With high hopes for a pleasant future, I entered my room with Angela pushing my wheelchair. But as soon as the door closed, her kind expression vanished. She frowned like a different person and said something shocking. "You know, you're an eyesore." "Excuse me. Are your ears as bad as your legs? Your presence in that wheelchair is an eyesore." I was stunned by Angela's drastic change and managed a weak, uncertain smile, saying, "You're joking, right?" To which she berated me even more. "I hate jokes. Everything I said is my honest opinion. But you just said you wanted to get along." "That was just an excuse to be alone with you." Hearing this unexpected statement, my mind went into a panic and my hand, covering my mouth, started trembling. Wait a minute. I can't comprehend this. Does she hate me? As I took a deep breath trying to understand what was said, she hurled more insults at me. "People who live leisurely at home without working are called parasites. Why are you being so harsh? Did you come to my room just to say these things?" "Yes. I feel sick having someone who only consumes money living in this house. I never imagined she could be this kind of person." My mind was still in turmoil, but I knew I had to respond. Looking her in the eye, I said, "I am working and paying for my living expenses." "Don't lie. How can you work while staying at home? Are you stupid?" I explained that I work from home, but she didn't believe me at all. Instead, she demanded that I, a useless freeloader, leave the house. I was shocked by such harsh words from her, whom I had only met a few times since my brother's marriage. Confused and unsure what to do, she said, "I can't stand even breathing the same air as you," and left the room. Alone, I kept replaying her words in my head. Should I tell my brother? As I was about to open my door, I remembered my past self. After falling down the stairs and losing consciousness, I awoke in the hospital to find my legs immobile. At that time, I couldn't accept this new reality immediately. Though I claimed to live facing forward, in reality, I hardly left my home, conscious of other people's eyes. Maybe Angela is in a similar situation. Instead of upsetting everyone by telling my parents and brother, I decided to wait and see. Surely, if we live together, we'll understand each other eventually. With that thought, I calmed my shaking heart. I tried to act cheerful around Angela, initiating conversations to get along better. But her cruel behavior only worsened day by day. She played the kind sister when our parents and brother were around, but as soon as they left for work, her harassment began. You don't work or pay, so you don't have the right to eat. One day, she threw away my lunch as soon as I sat down at the dining table. I've told you before, I do work, and I contribute to the food expenses. I have the right to eat. If you lie too much, your nose will grow like Pinocchio's. No matter how much I explained, Angela wouldn't listen. She insulted me and intentionally blocked my room door with objects to trap me inside. Unable to endure anymore, I told my parents and brother when they returned from work. I started talking when Angira is around, making sure she couldn't deny it. I'm having trouble because Angela threw away my food and trapped me in my room. That's not true. She said she didn't like what I made and threw it away. I was cleaning and accidentally left the vacuum cleaner in front of Margaret's room. I'm sorry for not being useful. Margaret, I'm sorry for making you feel bad. Angela acted like an actress, tearfully apologizing to me, and my parents and brother were completely deceived. I couldn't win against this. I started thinking that it would be better not to engage with her. After that, I hardly talked and spent more time in my room. One day, a year later, as I was returning to my room after breakfast, she started yelling at me in the hallway. Still planning to stay in your parents' house? You're so persistent. I'm sick of this pest. You useless parasite, get out now. Being used to her harassment, I pretended not to hear. But then she stood in front of me, blocking my path. Please move aside. As I tried to push past, Angela laughed and forcefully kicked the side of my wheelchair. I was hit by a severe impact and toppled over before I could steady myself. A sharp pain shot through my arm. I tried to get up, but I couldn't right my wheelchair lying on its side. Crawling on the floor in pain and humiliation, I looked up to see she standing over me, looking smug. Desperately looking up, I saw her trying to suppress a laugh, her arms crossed, clearly enjoying the situation. How pathetic you look. What a spectacle. Please, help me. Well, if I must. There. She kicked my wheelchair even further away, putting it out of my reach. Don't you think this is too much? I have to do this to get rid of a parasite, don't I? Give me back my wheelchair now. Not until you say you're leaving this house. So, what will it be? Looking down on me and acting so cruelly with ease, I realized I could never understand her. I decided to leave the home I'd grown up in. Fine. I'll move to a high-rise condominium. A high-rise condominium? As if you could afford that. Your denial is just sad. I don't care if you don't believe me. I'm leaving. Please return my wheelchair. Just wait for the caretaker who's due soon. I'm finally getting rid of the nuisance. Now this big house and all its wealth will be mine. Get on your precious wheelchair and start packing. That's when I realized her true nature. She would go this far for her own desires. Such a terrifying person. She looked like nothing but a devil to me, leaving me on the floor without returning my wheelchair, and then leaving the house. The floor was cold. And I was getting colder. I need to do something. Lying in the hallway in the middle of winter, my body temperature dropped rapidly. I tried to crawl to my wheelchair, but my injured arm was too weak to move. What if I stay like this? Shivering from the cold, I heard the front door open, and the caretaker arrived. Help me, please! Hearing my cry, the caretaker rushed over in a panic. Rubbing my injured arm unconsciously, the caretaker noticed something was wrong and immediately took me to the hospital. Luckily, there were no fractures, just bruises, so I was prescribed some ointment. Back at home, filled with frustration, I started preparing to move. I won't let this go. I'll show everyone her true nature. And so, the day of my move arrived. Angela had finished breakfast and was getting ready to leave. Hurrying to the entrance, she said to me, "Make sure you clean up and leave before I come back. And never return to this house." "Don't worry. I'll leave without leaving a trace." "Then goodbye. Forever." She left in unusually high spirits, her voice lively. I wonder what face she'd make if she knew the tragedy about to befall her. Get ready, my plan is almost complete. Despite saying this, it was hard to leave my cherished home. I said my farewells, touching the pillars and walls for the last time. Goodbye, my dear home. Thank you for everything. As the moving truck drove away, I watched the house disappear from view with a sense of longing. And true to my word to Angela, I moved into the top floor of a high-rise condominium. Watching the outside view, evening came before I knew it. The setting sun peeked through the buildings, illuminating my face. So beautiful. I can see this every day from now. Despite everything, I was filled with hope for my new life when my mobile phone rang. Seeing Angela's name on the screen, I calmly answered the call. "What's going on?" "The house is empty. I've moved out, as you can see. I'm busy, so I'm hanging up now." "Wait. Who gave you permission to do this? There's no TV, no air conditioner. I bought everything in the house, so no permission was needed." "What? Don't be ridiculous. Return everything." "I won't give back what's mine. By the way, I paid for the house's renovation and utilities. I should be asking you for money." "What? You're kidding, right?" "I'm serious, as you hate jokes. And yes, I moved to a high-rise condominium. The view from the top floor is amazing." I took the opportunity to tell her the truth she never listened to. "Did you realize you were bullying someone who provided you food and shelter? That's impossible. I never took anything from you. How did a homebody like you make money?" "I'm a stock trader." "That's a transparent lie. I worked for the securities company before my accident. Trading stocks is easy for me. I have $3 million in savings now." "Wait. Are you saying you, not your parents, are the wealthy one?" "Yes. I let my parents and Kevin save their earnings for retirement." "What? I married into the family thinking they were rich." Angela's true intentions spilled out. I knew it but had to ask, and she confirmed my suspicions. "Didn't you love Kevin?" "Love doesn't fill the stomach. I thought you were rich after seeing the big house. I was so fooled." "You misunderstood on your own. By the way, I invest in properties too. I own several apartments besides this condo. The wealthy and victorious one is me. You misjudged, sadly." "What? I won't forgive you." "Make a fuss if you want. You should worry about yourself." "Why?" "I've put that house up for sale." "We're still living there." "That's terrible." "My parents and Kevin moved with me, so you're left alone." "Oh, and Kevin has blocked your calls and emails." "What?" I almost laughed at her loud and shocked reaction. She frantically tried to contact Kevin, but of course, got no response. I revealed more truths she didn't know. "I owe it to you, Angela, for pushing me in the wheelchair and causing my injury." "Thank you." "What?" "The caretakers saw everything and told my family, so they helped me. Actually, we had secretly planned to move out without you. Moreover, my brother prepared something to definitely trap you. Remember last night when Kevin suggested you go out today to make moving easier? That was to clear the house before you knew it." She was silent for a moment, then suddenly changed her tone, trying to sound sweet. "Margaret, I think I went a little too far. Let's be close from now on. Okay? Telling such lies will make your nose grow like Pinocchio's. I wish we could be real sisters, Margaret. I can't stand this nonsense. By the way, this whole conversation is on speaker, and my family is listening. No one will forgive you. Kevin is divorcing you, so please live well on your own." She, realizing she couldn't persuade me, made a last-ditch effort.
Kevin, can you hear me? You're joking about the divorce, right?
He doesn't seem interested in responding. He's laughing and enjoying your desperate situation.
Shut up. Let's talk properly. I'll find your condo and come right now. Tell me where. Please.
Everyone burst into laughter at her, thinking she could still be forgiven. But knowing her, she might try to find our new home, so I sternly warned her. If you force your way into the condo, I'll sue you for trespassing.
Don't say such scary things.
I'm serious. And about the injury and mental distress you caused, I'll sue for compensation. I have the hospital reports, so you can't escape. Pay $20,000.
I'll be broke. You don't need the money, you're rich.
I'm asking for compensation to make you reflect. If you don't agree, talk to my lawyer. Goodbye forever.
I don't care about poor Kevin, but I don't want to lose wealthy you. I apologize. Please forgive me.
No way, you fool. I hung up forcefully. I gave Angela's photo to the condo's doorman, warning him about her, so security will respond if she steps foot inside. My brother, not wanting to see Angela's face anymore, had a lawyer I know finalize the divorce. Angela, who squandered my brother's earnings, only got $2,000 in the property settlement. She was living in the house we put up for sale, but the real estate buyer found her and she was fined for trespassing. Angela, now a criminal, is shunned even by her family and is lost without a home. I demanded the promised $20,000 in compensation. We will make sure she pays. Our family is living spaciously in a new high-rise condo, enjoying every day. Although I liked my big detached house, the view from the expansive windows, unobstructed by my wheelchair, is refreshing. The city lights at night bring a new joy. Get back home and start cooking quickly. That was the first thing my husband blurted out over the phone while I was at work. When he got home, he was visibly upset that dinner wasn't ready. Even though I had explained to him that I'm in the middle of a big project at work and it's a crucial time, he still clings to the old-fashioned belief that housework is a woman's job. You're obviously using work as an excuse to skip out on chores. I'll give you a piece of my mind when you get back. Despite having ended the call, my phone's notification light kept flashing incessantly. It was as if it was reflecting my husband's unending anger, causing me to sigh repeatedly. I'm Natalie, 40 years old. Earlier this year, I was promoted to a managerial position. Until I got married to Matthew, who is 6 years my senior, 3 years ago, my life was all about work. After getting married, I thought about scaling back my work, but then came the unexpected promotion. Now, with more responsibilities, my workload has only increased. Nonetheless, I've been trying to balance housework as best as I can. But feeling the strain of juggling both, I've asked Matthew to help out.
Please, can't you help out a bit with the chores?
What? Why should I do it? I'm the head of this household. But we're a dual income couple without kids. I think it's only fair you do some housework. Despite having those discussions many times, he eventually went and complained to my mother-in-law. Truth be told, mother-in-law is quite a tricky character.
Of course, the wife should do all the housework. You're failing as a wife,
she would say. Every time I see her, she gives me a hard time. Plus, she, who loves designer brands, always mocks my work-appropriate jacket and pants style as drab and cheap. Before I knew it, I was constantly receiving snide remarks from my mother-in-law and fighting with my husband, who doesn't understand the concept of a dual-income couple. All this leaves me with little hope for the future and a growing sense of despair. Then, one day, as I finished work and opened the front door of my house, I saw in-law's shoes. Are they both here? This is going to be troublesome. Just as I dreaded, my mother-in-law, standing tall, started lecturing me as expected. I've been waiting for you, Natalie. Leaving the house empty till this hour because of work. You really don't understand your role as a wife. Yeah, sorry. I replied, too tired to argue, enduring the hunger and her relentless sarcasm. While she was going on with her one-sided sermon, my father-in-law was lounging on the sofa, an annoying sight, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. A wife who neglects her home is a worry for our old age. We should move in together immediately. That's a bit. Your opinion doesn't matter. We've already planned to move in with you and even arranged a mortgage for a suitable house. Standing beside her, my husband listened to our conversation, then confidently and excitedly approached me with his news. Seeing his proud face, she looked very pleased. I couldn't help but feel completely excluded. That's exactly why I don't want that. If you don't like living with my parents, then let's get a divorce. That's impossible. Because... He cut me off, refusing to listen and, as usual, imposing his own opinions. Then just do as I, the man of the house, say. Don't act so high and mighty just because you work at a major company. Women should be quiet and obedient. It crossed my mind that he might not even remember our previous discussions. They, apparently giving up on my input, were excitedly discussing the new house. We'll have separate entrances in the new house for us. You guys will want your own entrance, right? Feel free to boss Natalie around whenever you need. Thank you, you are so thoughtful. A wife is like a free housekeeper. I'll use her to my heart's content. Despite the headache-inducing conversation, with the house loan already taken, I had no choice but to let Matthew have his way. 2 weeks later, on my rare day off, my in-laws suddenly moved into our house. Without any prior notice, mother-in-law, with her piles of luggage, barged in as if she owned the place. Matthew was out, and when I tried to call him to figure out what was happening, he didn't answer. My mother-in-law, in her usual flashy, embroidered designer clothes, started ordering me around as if it was the most natural thing. My father-in-law sank deeply into the sofa, showing no intention of helping. Clear out those cheap bags and clothes from your room. We're using your closet and bed from today. A semi-double bed is too much for you. You can sleep in the hallway. What? Didn't you hear me? Get moving. Wait a minute. Weren't we supposed to move in together only after getting the new house? Our house sold quicker than expected. Starting today, I'm going to retrain you to be a proper wife. She twisted her mouth maliciously, seeming to enjoy the moment. She completely ignored everything I said. Just thinking about starting life with father-in-law, who wouldn't even move things in front of him, weighed heavily on my heart. Doing as I was told, I began taking my clothes and bags out of my room, to her satisfaction. You're always wearing the same clothes despite your good salary, and you don't even own a designer bag. Yeah, I don't really focus on that stuff. That's why you're so plain and boring. You must have a lot saved up since you don't spend. Not really. Lying again. She mocking laughter, now even more spiteful, made me feel like she was targeting my savings. Also, you'll be buying all new appliances and furniture when we move to the new house. We only brought our clothes and newly acquired golf gear. She made decisions without listening to my opinion. Biting back what I wanted to say, I focused on tidying up. Not owning much, I quickly moved my belongings from my room to storage. Now it's time to store our important stuff. Hurry up. I placed her clothes and father-in-law's golf bags in the closet I had been using. She looked very satisfied watching this. As I was finishing up, my husband returned home and happily addressed me, seeing the situation. First of all, it was a luxury for a wife like you to even have a room. Leave it to my mother, and you'll become a proper wife. This is just the beginning. I'll drill into you what it means to be a wife. True to her word, the next day I was woken up at dawn to prepare breakfast for everyone, including sandwiches I had never before made for my husband. My mother-in-law just watched, offering no help. After completing everything and heading to work, she would call to order me to do shopping, and upon returning home, there was no rest, only dinner preparation. By the time I finished washing the dishes, my husband and mother-in-law were enjoying their shower time. Exhausted, as I headed to shower, she added, Use the stored water in the bathtub to wash yourself. You don't get the luxury of a shower. Entering the shower room silently, I found the water dirty and unappealing. Remember, use the stored water. I was shocked when the shower door suddenly opened. All I wanted was some privacy in the shower, but she wouldn't even allow me that. Why must I endure this when I'm the one paying the high heating bill? I'm so tired. Why are wives always looked down upon, regardless of the era? I could just refuse, but to avoid further conflicts, I told myself it was just temporary endurance. Of course, my husband showed no concern for me. In fact, he started exploiting me more. Hey Natalie, bring me beer and snacks. Lately, he just lounged on the sofa, playing games. Angered, I glared at him, and he yelled back. Don't get cocky. You just need to listen to me and my mother. I felt strongly that there was no one on my side in this house. A month into this hellish life, reaching my limit, I got a call from a real estate agent during lunch break. I had been secretly preparing to leave the house. Finally, the day I've been waiting for. I can be free. The next morning, with an innocent expression, I carried my suitcase to the living room where they were. I'll be on a business trip to Los Angeles for a few days. What an arrogant way to say it. Make sure to buy gifts. Don't forget there's a mountain of housework waiting when you get back. And so, I left the house. The business trip was a lie. I moved into my new house straight after work. Alone for the first time in a while, I felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. From now on, I'll live for myself. I resolved in my heart. Starting that day, I blocked my husband's calls and cut off all communication. A week later, my husband, unable to hide his irritation at my not returning home, was lurking behind a pillar at my workplace. As soon as he saw me, he rushed over and grabbed my arm tightly. His eyes were wild, his face flushed, glaring at me threateningly. I knew it. You were back from your trip already. Let's go home. No, I'm not going back. What nonsense are you spouting? How dare you, a wife, act like this? Do you want a divorce that badly? Yes. No one will take you in after me. Actually, we're already divorced, so we're strangers now. You haven't forgotten, have you? Huh? You slapped a divorce paper in my face 3 months ago after a huge fight. What? Did you file it? His voice trembled as he asked for confirmation. When I affirmed, he was visibly shocked and disoriented. In fact, before my in-laws arrived, he had suggested living together. I naturally refused, and in anger, he presented the divorce papers. I made good use of them. But just recently, when I said if you didn't like living together we should divorce, you said that's impossible. We're already divorced. It's ridiculous to live together when we're separated, isn't it? Then why were you living with us? I bought a new apartment but couldn't move in immediately. I was told it would take 1 to 2 months, and after spending much of my savings on the apartment, I couldn't afford a hotel. He was stunned, not only that the divorce was already final, but also that I had purchased an apartment. His previously flushed face turned pale. Now that you understand, are we done here? Not at all. That's joint property, right? I bought it with money I saved before marriage, so it's my personal property. Seriously? Oh, right. Your stuff is still there, come get it. You're just saying that to get your parents to persuade me. I've seen through all your plans. I've packed everything I need in my suitcase. I've even reserved luxury furniture from famous brands. For a moment, he looked envious. Had he cherished me, this wouldn't have been the outcome. Such a pity. I don't accept this. I'm canceling the divorce. As I said, you're the one who slapped the divorce papers on me. Even if you take it to court, it'll be a waste of effort. Look, I'm in trouble without you. I can't pay off the mortgage for the house we bought together. I was counting on splitting it with you since you earn more. Then he started to cry. I was astonished to hear he relied on my salary to buy the house. Doing the math, at 45 years old,
Matthew took out a 35-year mortgage. He'd be 80 by the time it's paid off. It's none of my concern now. You'll have to pay it all yourself.
No, no, no. Don't be cold, help me find a solution. We were married once, after all.
Your parents have the money from selling their house. Use that. Well, actually, they didn't sell the house. It was auctioned off due to my parents defaulting on the loan. What did they spend the money on? Designer clothes, bags, and Dad's expensive golf gear. I was shocked. They really intended to live off me. The day they moved in, my suspicion that they were after my money wasn't unfounded. I'm glad I divorced. I felt reassured about my decision. Despite their precarious situation, they gambled, hoping for a big win. They ended up borrowing dangerously and lost everything. Now, just paying the interest is a struggle. I refuse to spend my life with such people. Never contact me again. Then my ex-husband blurted out something ridiculous.
The house we bought is joint property since we bought it before the divorce. What? You have a duty to pay the mortgage.
It's in your name. If it's recently bought, selling it won't even cover the deficit. If you think I'm lying, check it out.
Then let's get back together.
I have no intention of returning to a husband who looks down on me as a wife. What nonsense he was speaking. He didn't understand how awful his actions were.
Then lend me money. Sleep talking is meant to happen while you are sleeping. By the way, our joint savings had $10,000, so I took $5,000 as my share. Goodbye forever. If you ambush me again, I'll call the police.
Matthew collapsed as if knocked out. I walked past him and returned to my home. Feeding their extravagant parents and paying the mortgage must be hellish. I didn't expect to be ambushed again, but just to be safe, I changed to a new mobile phone and got a different number. The house my ex-husband bought, intended for co-living, was auctioned off within a year due to my in-laws' presence causing delays in mortgage and property tax payments. Relying on my income for the new house, it was obviously difficult for them to make payments once I left. Later, my in-laws created more debt for themselves and failed to repay it, leading to debt collectors' arrival. I heard they were forced into labor at a place arranged by the collectors, having to give up their cherished designer items and luxury golf clubs. Matthew, of course, with no money, ended up living in an old apartment with dubious stains on the floor and no shower. In such a state, it's unlikely he'll find a new wife. I'm enjoying my days, excited about life in my new apartment. The freedom to live without anyone's orders, just relaxing, is blissful. Living alone is the best.